Chapter 71, Incursion 1. What shall we do? If we move with haste, then there is a possibility to create friction with other clans. Michael pondered at the words of Liu Hong, the captain of the shock troopers. It had already been 4 years since he had come into the otherworld. He had gone through a lot in the otherworld. He had trampled on those who tried to kill him and used the people who would benefit him no matter how. He didn't know whether his actions were correct or wrong, but after a while of doing similar actions, he had felt that he could get some form of sensation. Whether he needed a person or not. Whether a person was somebody he could approach or not. A sensation came to him. I think that if I get rid of the poison, then there will be some very sweet meat. He won't be easy. Like how a pufferfish becomes an extremely tasteful material once one gets rid of the toxins. Kang Hansu will puke out a lot of things, like how a strong monster dropped a lot of things. Get him? I'm also curious as to what he gained inside there too. Liu Hong nodded at those words. That guy had pulled something out from the heart. That was likely the reward for killing the calamity fish. No, even without that, that guy was the sole survivor that knew of its insides. He was somebody they needed to catch due to many different reasons. Catch him before you clash with the other clans. Liu Hong stopped while sending out the blue carrier pigeons in all directions, and spoke while laughing. It's not likely that we won't be able to catch him before he gets to a different clan's territory. They had come down with 5 teams of shock troopers, consisting of 12 people each, and 10 search teams of 20 people each, since it was quite an important event for them. They couldn't take a lot of people in order to maintain the power up above on the pillar, but other clans were like that too. One single search team could destroy most normal people. And one of those search teams had tailed Hansu, and others were quickly heading towards the location where the blue carrier pigeons pointed them to. What could have changed in a week? They had said that he was quite strong for a newcomer, since he was strong enough to beat back Kalt's Morn. But they didn't believe that they won't be able to catch him. Though that guy had killed the calamity fish, if such a thing could be killed with strength, then that guy wouldn't have run away from Kalt's Morn in the first place. Even if that guy had gained something amazing, not much would change. I should still go. Liu Hong quickly moved as he sent the blue carrier pigeons towards the leaders of the shock trooper teams and search teams. Boom! Who you K? Hugan, a member of one of the search teams who were following him, grinded his teeth and backed off as he felt his defense skill get chopped off. Got him, Nit. Though they were just a part of the search team, they were still clansmen of Lighthouse. They could fight somebody from the shock troopers of the 12 Roots 1-on-1. They had equipped themselves with survival-related skills, since there were a lot of dangerous situations. But every time that crazy sword cut through the air, their skills were getting smashed apart despite being tens of meters away. Godamit closed the surrounding net. And the moment you got scratched by that guy's sword, your blood would pour out. The search area for Hecate, an enemy clan, was around here. And they couldn't leave behind the injured in such a place. Because they had to take the injured with them, the speed at which they were closing the net was slowing down. And what hurt his pride even more was the fact that the guy over there wasn't running away despite knowing that he was being chased. That bastard, is he looking down us? That guy was constantly disappearing and appearing around the Kukulja lake even whilst swinging his sword. Let's see how long you can run for. The blue carrier pigeons should arrive by now, which meant that everyone will gather towards here. Once more search teams get here and the shock troopers get here, then it'll be the end for this guy, no matter how talented he was. Hansu, who had been running around the Kukulja lake and collecting the Jeuch seeds, clicked his tongue at the guys charging towards him. Annoying pests. An information which Hansu had acquired on the way out. For 3 days to have passed, he needed to collect Jeuch seeds in order to go into the devouring and vomiting route, but it seemed like he won't be able to collect the amount he needed at this rate. There were tens of thousands of lily flowers which had the Jeuch seeds floating around the top of the lake next to him, but it was very difficult due to the guys behind him sticking by so closely. Hansu shook his head after watching the guys chasing him from behind. There's no time to collect them all. If you like me so much, then I should fulfill your wishes. Hansu stopped running around the Kukulja lake and pulled something out from his pouch. The heart of the offspring of the calamity fish which he had acquired before. And the core part of it the seed. Because even the heart of the baby calamity fish was so big, the core part was still the size of his head after cutting it out. Hansu cut out a palm-sized piece from that thing. He then shook off the people pursuing him a little bit, then started to madly run around the lake and collected materials. Uncle sent sack. I collected essence of Aaron just now. I need Gon's horn. This is a bit dangerous, but it's a method for when you can't collect all the seeds in time. Only use it during emergencies. Awaking after 3 days of being unconscious is an emergency. Hansu swung his sword backwards a few times, and then quickly started to head towards the Gon's habitat near the lake. Quaia. At that moment, something popped out from the ground and attacked Hansu. The Gon, which had the shape of a lizard with 3 horns, suddenly popped out from the ground and then tried to bite Hansu with its giant jaw. Though it had a slow movement speed, it moved under the ground and then ambushed somebody above the ground with lightning speed and crunched them with their jaw. Hansu flinched after seeing the Gon that had popped out. 3. The end route here was not a place where a 3-horned Gon came out on. It was at most 2-horned. 3-horned was a much bigger version that came out much farther above the middle route. And because of this, Hansu knew immediately. It's almost here. The fact that something that should have been above is down here meant that the devouring and vomiting route was steadily heading towards their direction. Hansu undensed formless sword that he had elongated earlier, and then stabbed it between its jaw and the cervical, where it wasn't covered with bones. Quajuduk. The formless sword which had gone in between the gap spread out inside the neck, and then cut off all the blood flow and nerves. Qduk. Hansu, who had turned it powerless in an instant, cut of its horns and then frowned slightly. If it's a 3-horned one, then the effect might be a bit stronger than I expected. But this wasn't the time to worry about such things. Hansu crushed the piece of calamity fish offspring's heart, turned it into paste, and then quickly mixed on the newly attained Gon's horn and other materials. The mixture in Hansu's hands quickly turned black as time passed by. But unlike its color, it started to pour out a very pleasing scent in all directions. And Hansu, who was smelling this strong scent, quickly threw it into the pool. The moment the mixture in Hansu's dropped down into the waters, it disappeared very quickly. At that time, something flew towards his head at an extreme speed. Sword of Light, a skill like this. Hansu frowned at the sword that was slashing down towards him from the skis, and then slashed his own sword as he split the translucent sword in the sky in two. Qjujuduk. At the same time, Hansu jumped into the Jeuch habitat near the Kukulja lake. Hansu, who had been standing around tens of thousands of lily-like flowers, spoke towards the people coming down one by one. Why are you chasing me so hard? We won't see each other in the future anyway. Somebody else answered this question. That's not something you decide. I have a lot of questions. Michael, who had arrived along with Liu Hong as his guard, laughed as he looked at Hansu in the distance. There really wasn't a need to come, but he had come all the way here because he was curious. If you killed the calamity fish, then that's enough to make me come see you. There wasn't just 1 or 2 things he was curious about. How he had killed the calamity fish. How he had survived the insides of the calamity fish. What he had obtained after killing that giant thing. And most importantly, is there a possibility to kill the other 4 calamities? If you could kill the other 4 calamities, or even know their fatal weaknesses, then the red zone's governing style will change completely. It's also not bad to engrave my name before I go up. Michael laughed as he finished his thoughts. Why are you trying to do something that hard by yourself? It'll be so much easier if we help you. You can kill the others ones right too. Of course, the killer of the thing would change if he were to act together with Hansu, and the reward ratio will be slightly, or even largely, changed, but it would be a win-win for both. Good for him and good for that guy. He will say there is. Because there wouldn't be a need to keep him alive otherwise. Rumors had been spread already. That lighthouse had received a large amount of damage from one newcomer, like a bunch of retards. Of course, members of other clans had followed in too, but the single fact that Kalt's Morn lead them was a disgrace on its own. If that guy didn't know how to deal with the other calamities, then it would be much better to just take the thing that guy obtained from inside the calamity fish and then kill him. At that time, a very faint vibration could be felt from beneath the earth. Kyujujujudo. Did the structure of the root get weaker from the tsunami that the calamity fish made? If not, then there wouldn't be such a thing like an earthquake occurring around this location. While the people were making confused expressions and tried to activate their searching skills, Hansu answered Michael's question. Of course I can kill the other ones. I was just about to go there. Since you're going to help me, I thank you. Let's go together then. Boom. At that moment, the surface broke apart. Something rose up above the surface of the Kukolja lake. A gigantic root that looked like a tree root from one glance, but was moving in a way that a plant could not. The tens of split-up mouths on the end of the root, along with thousands of teeth that were the size of a man, constantly opened and closed as they ate up the toxic waters. Michael frowned intensely after seeing this. Devil's Mouth, why is this here? Devil's Mouth. It was a thing located within the deepest parts of the dungeon, within the world tree root. The thing that was estimated to be part of the devouring and vomiting root. Actually, nobody knew what the devouring and vomiting root looked like, since there wasn't a single story of somebody surviving after entering that mouth. The skin of that crappy-looking root was so tough that nobody had been able to damage it so far. Since nobody had been able to see its true body, one of the four calamities was better known as Devil's Mouth, instead of devouring and vomiting root. But it was usually quietly sucking the world tree's toxic waters. Why did it come all the way out here? And he had never heard of that thing thrashing about madly like that. Yuak, go up and dodge it. Damn it, how do you want me to dodge this? The mouth of the root that was extended from the ground was tens of meters in diameter alone. Multiple tens of these were rising up from below. Michael quickly sent messages to the search team that he had previously ordered to search other locations. Then he frowned intensely. Damn it, other places aren't like this. Why is it like this here? The root that popped out was drinking onto the toxic waters of the Kukolja lake, as if it was thirsty, and the waters of the giant Kukolja lake was disappearing at a rapid pace, as if a stopper below the bathtub had been removed. But the problem was that the surrounding terrain was getting destroyed, and they were getting sucked into the mouth at a rapid pace. How could they dodge properly when the ground beneath them was falling apart? Hundreds of clansmen who had come around here were getting sucked into the mouth below. Hansu laughed coldly as he saw this. It arrived earlier than I expected. Good. The root and the mouth, which had rushed in after getting lured from the scent of the calamity fish's offspring, was drinking up the toxic waters, while the large amount of jayuches and their seeds were getting carried along in there with the water. Though everything had proceeded according to his plan, but it was more dangerous because of this. Hansu tensed up his whole body. Devouring and vomiting root. A thing that steals the toxic waters that flows through the interior of the world tree root. Since it drinks up the toxic waters of the world tree, which acts as a purifier and turns the toxic waters into nutritional fluid, that alone makes the amount of nutritional fluid dry up. But the reason why that thing was called a calamity was not just because that mouth acted as a tool for sucking in the toxic waters. It was a thing that puked out all the beasts that were born from the main body deep inside the earth, into the area of the world tree through its mouth. It was dual structure root. Unlike the outside mouth, which was for drinking, the inside mouth was a passage which constantly vomited out beasts. And he had to go in because of this, so he could get to the main body. Let's go. Hansu breathed in and out deeply as he saw the beasts popping out from within the mouth, clenched his teeth, and then jumped downwards. Chapter 72, Incursion 2. Kayak. Hansu shook his head even while jumping down as he saw the huge amount of beasts in the inner parts of the mouth. That was just the start. There's going to be more of them from now on. The calamity fish and devouring and vomiting root had similarities and differences. The similarity was that they were both impossible to kill from the outside. Their main habitat was either the deep parts of the ocean or deep within the earth, inside the world tree's root, where it was hard for humans to reach. The outer skin was so tough to the point that a human injuring it was almost impossible, and even if one did manage to damage it, if you take account of the fact that you need to count their giant size in kilometers, then any plans from the outside was futile. And he had to attack it from the inside because of this. The calamity fish had left the inner defenses to the tentacles, but the devouring and vomiting root didn't really have a need to create a defensive system due to its peculiar trait. The beasts who were created from the plant would endlessly charge out through the tunnel. Even if they made their way through while killing the beasts, they'll still be trampled by the other ones who would continue to charge. This is why I gotta solve that before I go. The outer mouth was endlessly sucking in the toxic waters with a powerful suction strength, and the beasts of the inner mouth were roaring in glee as if they were waiting for food to be dropped. Hansu stepped atop the teeth that were on the outer parts of the inner mouth as he bought a bit of time. Well, there's a few guys copying me. Hansu shook his head towards the few clansmen who he could see in the distance. It'll all be in vain. Once all the surface around here gets crushed and the demon mouth completely fills this place up, those guys will be given two choices. To either drown by going into the outer mouth, where the toxic waters were going into, or to go into the inner mouth before the entrance closes and fight with the beasts. Once these things close their mouths, then they'll all get swallowed even if they're bouncing atop the teeth. A moment is more than enough. Hansu, who jumped in place a single time, pulled something out from his pouch. A small divine stone fragment, which was the size of a rice grain. Hansu took a glance at the divine stone fragment and then scooped up a bit of the baby's heart from his pouch. I need to use it a bit at a time. He needed to use the heart as the poison to catch the third guy of the pillar. Hansu, who had scooped up a small amount of the heart, tied the divine stone fragment and the baby's heart piece together, and then threw it into the mouth where the toxic waters were getting sucked into. Plub! Soon the fragment swept down the waters as it disappeared into the outer tunnel. Kagagagugugu. Once it had almost drank up all of the waters in the Kukulja lake, it started to slowly close its mouth. Though it would rise back up because it was connected to the sea, but those things had drunk so viciously that it had almost dried up. Though it was wide, it wasn't very deep, so it could not quench their thirst. Kulo. Hansu landed on the inner tunnel as he saw the mouth close. Kaya. A large amount of beasts had already set up camp there. Well, this is just the starting point. Maybe because they were located in the outermost root, but the difficulty of the beasts were not high. Of course, they will continue to gather up to him if he were to continue to fight back and forth here. Get through them quickly. Hansu extended the blade of his sword and then swung it in all directions. Chhgagagagak. Kaya. The Gurdas dropped artifacts and runes in all directions as they got cut in halves. Kaya. Hansu endlessly picked up the things that were dropped as he continued forward. This guy's route was quite similar to the world tree. As you went further and further up, the smaller roots would combine into each other as they become bigger. And of course stronger beasts appeared the higher you went. Hansu held onto the Galadriel's relic, judgment, and quickly headed upwards. At that moment, a sound of things getting slashed apart could be heard approaching him. Kyujujuduk. Yujuduk. It's about time we meet. They had separated into different mouths. Of course they would meet as they head upwards, while killing the beasts since the roots combined. A person who was walking while swinging a giant sword and slashing the beasts apart could be seen in the distance. A bit below Kalt's Morn is he the new captain of the shock troopers. And he could see somebody walking next to him with a cold expression in protection. He's the captain of Lighthouse is that guy Michael? Hansu suddenly thought of Keldian's show-off. There's probably a clan I made there. It's pretty good for something I made in a year. Be nice to them. If it's then, it should be the 7th patriarch. It was a brat called Michael. He had quite a bit of grievances, so be nice to him. It seems he had quite a harsh life once I heard his story after he climbed up. Seeing that he hadn't died and was collecting the forces proved that his skills were quite good. Well, I'll try, Keldian. It would have been different if they hadn't crossed roads in the first place, but since it has become like this, it was better to have a good relationship. Since they're now on the same boat. It was some extra people who weren't part of his plan, but it wouldn't hurt since they wanted to help. Anyways, this is unexpected. I thought the clan lord would have escaped. Hansu greeted the captain of the shock troopers, who had an expression that wanted to send over a skill at any moment. Isn't it much better seeing me in a place like this? What are you thinking? Michael answered Hansu's question instead of the captain of the shock troopers, since he could not figure out what Hansu was thinking of. No, I can't even tell if he's a newcomer or not. At first he was befuddled, then he was enraged, and then he was curious. The reason why he had rated this Hansu guy in front of him highly was partially because of his battle prowess, but mainly due to his unknown intelligence. Since he had heard that this Hansu guy had prepared everything perfectly in order to kill the calamity fish, and had successfully done so. But coming in here without any preparations was not part of his plan. He might have understood it if that guy had actually tackled through them, escaped this place with some unknown method, and left them behind to fight while buying some time. But for him to come into the mouth with them, does he have the confidence to escape this at any time? Michael shook his head. The first thing they had done earlier was pouring attacks at it, trying to penetrate through this thing's skin. But it was for naught. The skin was so hard that the attacks didn't even work properly, and when they made a decent-sized hole, the toxic waters that this thing had drunk rushed in at a rapid pace. Even if they did go through it, they'll just get swept by. They thought of escaping while this guy opened its mouth to drink the toxic waters, but gave that idea up once they heard the outside clansman's message, since the people who had been sucked inside the root were doing the same thing. And the message said that no one had come out. If the whole clan was to use up all their forces, a few people including himself would be able to get out, but he didn't want to get out this way. And that was why he had come to find this guy, with hopes of him having some plans. Hansu laughed as he saw that Michael. Didn't you say you wanted to kill this thing? I've done this to fulfill your wish. With just these numbers, we'll get trampled on the way there. Michael made a helpless expression. They only had about 150 people, including all of the search teams and the shock troopers. Of course, these guys were the elites of the elites in the red zone. But if it could be solved with just this, then why would it be called a calamity? They will all get crushed apart by the ones coming down on the way up. Hansu shook his head at Michael's words. It'll be easier to do it now. With those words, a very faint vibration could be felt from far away. An extremely large underground cavity. A large factory-shaped building was located near below the world tree. Something that seemed like a relic of a highly intelligent race. A building that seemed like the product of modern technology was now covered with unknown mucus and suspicious-looking roots, like symbolizing the Elvenheim who had lost and gone extinct. But surprisingly, the plant, which was a core part of the Elvenheim, was still maintaining its function despite being covered in numerous strange things. And in the hundreds of millions of cultivating containers within the plant, things were constantly getting produced, though they weren't being used properly under what the Elvenheims wanted. The main body of the devouring and vomiting root, who had spread his devil's mouth in all direction with the plant under his full control, made a joyous sound, since he could feel his mouths penetrating through the earth and having reached the sea. Sucking the toxic waters of the world tree was quite a lot, but sucking it directly from the sea was completely different in terms of quantity. The toxic water that had multiplied a few times in quantity was constantly getting transferred to it. The main body then got those toxic waters and then focused on his main job. It took a part of it and used it to fill its stomach. Then it poured the remaining toxic waters into the plant, which he had infected. Soon the divine stone fragment, which was embedded within the core of the devouring and vomiting root, made a blinding light as it started to pour out an amazing amount of energy. A huge amount of energy and toxic waters were being supplied to the plant. The plant, which was able to send out beasts all around the World Tree mountain range despite having a lack of energy and toxic waters, shined brightly in red with the plentiful amount of toxic waters and energy as if it could now work to its fullest and start it up. The plant, which was the result of Elvenheim's alchemistry, started to create a huge amount of beasts according to the saved DNA information. It numbered many times larger than usual. The main body happily stimulated the fragment more as it sucked in the toxic waters more fervently. The beasts who woke up from the cultivating containers inside the plant made confused expressions, but then made vicious roars as they spread out through the root's tunnels, so they could fulfill their objectives. Inside that plant, millions of GHWH seeds were endlessly pouring in while sucking in the nearby toxic waters. By the time the arrived balloons gathered around a certain location inside, the divine stone fragment that Hansu Mad mixed in and sent up was almost about to explode. Since though it was dead, the baby heart piece had constantly stimulated the fragment to give off energy. Soon the fragment, which had reached its limit, started to pour out a huge amount of energy in all directions. The moment the extremely bright light, which had the ability to scorch Hansu through his reinforcement before, touched the surrounding toxic waters, the waters turned into vapor instantly, and the toxic vapor that had remained after caught on fire. Then an explosive chain reaction happened. Boom. The gas lit on fire, and the explosion from the gas blew up the nearby balloons. The toxic waters evaporated from the explosion, and then more gases came out. The main body, which was fully immersed in controlling the devil's mouth in order to suck in the toxic waters, looked at the plant, which had turned into a sea of flames, and roared out in rage. Crunch! The people flinched as they saw the tunnel of the root shrink suddenly, since it felt like the root had been enraged. Hansu nodded as he saw this. It blew up properly. Of course, killing the main body with such an explosion was just in his dreams, since the main body was not weak like that. But that plant would have been destroyed to the point where it would not be able to function temporarily. According to the information he had received from the Elvenheim he had met in the abyss, the durability of the plant was not that high, since their race didn't have any enemies during the time they ruled this world. We have to move while the plant is stopped. The plant, which was condensed from the technology of the Elvenheim, was sadly made too well. It would recover after a while, and then completely focus on creating beasts. They had to tackle through during the time when the new supply of beasts had been cut off and get to the main body. Let's go. Michael looked at Hansu with an expression full of suspicion. What did he do? Does he know what's at the end of this route? From the way he was speaking, it seemed like his plans had succeeded. Michael did not understand this. No one knew what the main body of the devil's mouth was, or what would come out at the end of this tunnel. But how did Hansu know of it to set up such a plan? Many thoughts flashed by Michael's head, but the conclusion came out rather quickly. I just need to focus on getting out of this place. As long as that guy was not suicidal, he would have prepared a method of surviving. If not, then they'll blame him for that when the time comes. Let's go, prepare your formations. Shock troopers stand in the front. Since Hansu was doing his part, he needed to do his own part. If he were to fight with that guy because of his pride and make Hansu lead them onto a strange path, then they'll only receive damage. Hansu nodded while looking at Michael, who started to control his clan. You made a wise decision. He didn't want to fight a bloodbath with these guys here either. Every grain of battle power was precious. Hansu quickly stored the small divine stone fragment that he had made for emergencies as he quickly moved his footsteps. Collect 2 relics that are here on the way there. The relics of 2 of the 5 great Tiger generals who had died after coming in here in order to retrieve the plant. With those he would have 3 in total, including the Galadriel's relic he had. If that were to happen, then he wouldn't need to think much anymore, since he would be able to use the relics properly then. Hansu started to proceed head-on. Chapter 73, Incursion 3. Chugagaguk. Michael shouted urgently while looking at the beasts charging at them. Single column, shock troopers divide into 2 teams. Use Ackle's castle wall at the same time. Search teams focus on attacking the legs. The things that were running towards them were the black cow. A gigantic cow of 15 meters that could be found in the deep parts of the dungeon around the base route. These things, which came out as a mini-boss in the base route's dungeon, were just roaming around in this location like unfenced cows. Damn it, it's a problem when it's too wide, for such things to roam around with no restrictions. The route they were constantly climbing on had reached 200 meters in diameter already, so such large cows did not have any problems roaming around. Kuwu. There were only 9 of them charging at them. But it seemed like a giant tsunami had blocked the passageway and was charging at them. At that moment, a single strand of shining line swept past their ankles. Chujujujak. Kuwu. The ankles were still over 1 m in thickness, but the formless blade which had cut through their ankles cut over half of it off. Of course, they couldn't maintain their heavy weight when over half of their ankles had been cut off. Kuwawowu. 3 of the giant cows that were charging lost their balance and toppled over. Kujujuduk. And because of this, the other cows that were charging penetrated the sides of these toppled cows with their horns. Attack! The clansmen of Lighthouse didn't miss out on the opportunity as they charged and started to cut up the ankles first, since their weakness was the ankles that were a bit too thin to support their giant body. The relics they had obtained inside the stomach of the calamity fish was of great help. Michael, who had been looking at his clansmen finishing off the cows, looked at Hansu and asked, "Is that the final reward you gained from inside the calamity fish?" He could only ask, since it looked like even the 7 departed souls wouldn't have such a weapon like that. There weren't many other functions. It wasn't like the sword of Beek Jongseng obtained at the branch, the Tower of Departed Souls, which had the ability to float around one's body and protect them, or like the sword of his captain of shock trooper Liu Hong, Silver Curtain, which had skills mounted on it. But instead it solely focused on its role as a sword. One could change the length and shape any way they wanted to. They could cut anywhere, and once you shortened the length and compressed it down, it would get so sharp that nothing wouldn't be able to be cut. Even before this, the red scale ogre that their clansmen could barely crush after a huge amount of assaults had been smashed apart by a single slash of his sword. Though it was an injury of a finger's length, it was still enough. The sword which had been inserted through that hole increased in length as it destroyed the insides of its body. It looked similar to the relics they had obtained, but there were very large differences between their might and effectiveness. Hansu, who was absorbing runes corresponding to his contribution, nodded at Michael's words. Well, it's something like that. There weren't any rewards for killing the calamities like the calamity fish. But as Hansu thought, the relics he could obtain on the way were quite close to the final reward. Even more so once I collect more of them. Anyways, my stats are. Hansu checked for the first time in a while. Kang Hansu. Strength red, 33.2%. Stamina red, 31.5%. Agility red, 35.3%. Perception red, 33.9%. Mana red, 35.1%. Magic red, 36.5%. Physical resistance red, 31.1%. Magic resistance red, 36.4%. Skill, Demonic Dragon's Reinforcement Mastery, 3.5%. Good, I wish it increased above 5% quickly. Strong monsters were constantly popping out. An amazing hunting ground. And the level of the people he was with was quite high, so their hunting speed was very fast. Unlike the colorless zone, all 8 different runes dropped in similar proportions, so he didn't really need to take care of his runes as all of them rose steadily. His mastery was increasing quite fast as well. High-level skills took an enormous amount of time to increase their mastery. If you take into account that a skill like Demonic Dragon's Reinforcement usually takes about 5 years for a normal person to master, then Hansu's pace was extremely fast. If I go with these guys then, would I be able to skip on using the racial metamorphosis once? Hansu stared at Michael. Racial metamorphosis was a skill which put extreme amounts of strain on the user's body. It was quite hard for him to use it because it hadn't been long since he started to use it. And because of this, Hansu's plan was to hunt around under the ground, wait for the racial metamorphosis to cool down, and then move out. Since the difference of battle strength between turning the special skill on and not using it was too big. On the other hand, if these guys performed well, then he didn't need to waste time and could just go through the central heart right now. Michael looked at Hansu staring at him and opened his mouth. Do you really not have any thoughts of coming into our clan? We can really give you the greatest treatment. It seems like your gear is quite lacking other than your sword. We can fit you with the top quality ones. Hansu chuckled. Since all his defensive items had been destroyed from getting attacked by the tentacles while he was killing the calamity fish, how could a mere defensive item remain unbroken when it was getting attacked by things that a dragon's body couldn't even handle? Well, I can solve that in here. Hansu looked at Michael and replied, let's first focus on staying friendly in here. Michael made an expression full of regret at Hansu's words. I really don't know what this guy is, seriously. He had thought that he had seen quite a vast amount of types of people. Though all their action patterns were similar. They would struggle to stay alive, struggle to get stronger, then try to use whatever they gain in the middle however they can. But someone like this was the first. Tisk, observe him for now. Those who hide their intentions would definitely attack their backs. Even those who show their intentions do it so. The ones who hide them were worse. Because of this, he had sent messages all around as soon as he met this guy and told them to find out more about this guy. Since the information he had was not satisfying enough. If this guy was someone he couldn't trust, then he could not get on the same boat as him. No, it wasn't that he couldn't get on the same boat as him, but rather that he had to kick that guy out. But thankfully, a lot of people knew his name as he had stood out greatly since the tutorial. According to the combined intel of those who had met this guy wasn't a bad person to keep as a teammate. No, it wasn't that it was bad, but rather very good. It's really regrettable. It was really regrettable. To the point of making him anxious if he didn't come to him. But Michael's thoughts did not last long, since the surrounding environment started to change quickly. Kujujujuduk. Ujujuduk. A vicious sound of the root getting squeezed down could be heard. As the giant root, which had the size of 100 meters in diameter, made noises like muscles getting squeezed, the people's expressions naturally turned grim. And in their view, a large area could be seen. Though the tunnel made of the root had been quite wide until now, if those things had the shape of a tunnel, then the space in the distance was basically a humongous sports field. A single heart was located in the center of the giant space, where tens of different tunnels were leading to. The repulsive-looking heart, which had eyes and a mouth attached onto it, constantly pumped up and down as it supplied the nearby tree roots with the nutrition they needed to move. Of course, such things didn't come into their eyes. Do we have to get through that thing? Tens of thousands of soldiers who were located around the heart. They had seen it before. The strange race who they had seen while they were searching around the calamity fish. If there was a difference, then these guys did not look like zombies and were rather quite full of vigor, though their eyes dazed out. These things which were gazing into the distance creaked their body and turned towards them as they got closer to them. Hansu looked at that thing and then spoke towards Michael. You definitely cannot die. If they die here, then the heart will swallow the dead person. Then that heart will use the genes of the one it had swallowed and revive it in the plant. Like the army in front of their eyes. They had to penetrate this while the function of the plant was still down. Michael shook his head at those words. Damn it, even if you tell us not to die, how can we against that? Their numbers were vastly different from the start, and their equipment was similar to theirs, which meant that there wasn't much room for profit. It seemed like the strength of every individual was higher on their side, but it didn't matter in front of numbers. Hansu breathed in and out. Since those words were correct, their current situation was quite lacking in order to beat 2 of the 5 great tiger generals who were standing mightily in the center. I'll use it here. It was a bit burdensome to fight with the human's body, while the racial metamorphosis was still on cooldown due to him not having all the relics yet. But if the others fight well, then it was still doable. Everyone focus on your mana control. Michael replied at the sudden words of Hansu. What are you going to do? Hansu breathed in and out at those words. I should use what I've gained. He only said this, but what he had obtained after killing the calamity fish was a lot. Hansu then pulled out a very small divine stone fragment of the size of a rice grain. Then he very carefully lifted it near the Galadriel's relic in his hands. Surprisingly, the divine stone fragment which had been placed on the edge of the sword didn't fall off, and instead floated near the handle of the sword, as if it was saying that it was its original position. Since I'm not the only one using it, I should float a few more. Hansu breathed in and out, broke a few more fragments, and then quickly closed the pouch where the giant divine stone fragment was in. Kiyering. The fragments which were floating around the relic started to pour out an extremely bright light, like back when it was providing a huge amount of energy inside the calamity fish's heart. The divine stone fragment didn't stop there, as it started to slowly pour out a huge amount of energy. Kyujujujujuk. Of Yuha. Ook. All the clansmen of Lighthouse, who were gathered in a group with Michael as the center, were shocked at the sudden powerful mana storm that poured out. Then the blades of their swords started to react to the mana storm. And then a bright blade started to cover the relics they were holding onto. A bright blade which had the destruction capability that was dimensions apart from the blade on their formless sword earlier. If the formless sword's blade was like a calm surface of water, then the bright blade on their sword was like a blazing flame. Focus on control. The clansmen instinctively knew that the relic in their hands could control this energy. Once they focused all of their mental power, the blazing blade that seemed like it was about to sweep over its surroundings started to change into a single strand of condensed blade. Oolong. What is going to happen? Michael was marveling at the weapons in his and his clansmen's hands, but Hansu's situation wasn't that great. It's killing me. The situation of those who had to control a strand of mana that had branched out in him, who had to control the main part of the mana, was completely different. The energy of the divine stone fragment was jumping around, as if it was about to explode in all directions. Though the size of the fragment was small, he only had a single relic in the current situation where he couldn't get help from the world tree. Controlling this huge amount of energy, with a feeble human's body, felt like all of his blood vessels were about to blow apart. It was like trying to make a crazy horse run forward without a saddle and a whip. But I still have to do it. Hansu used the Galadriel's relic in his hand, as he constantly controlled the surrounding mana wave, as he also condensed energy into his sword. Quajajajajak. Soon, like lightning striking down onto his sword, a bright golden blade appeared on the edge of Galadriel's relic, in Hansu's hands. Ji-Liang. Hoo-hoo, much better now. Hansu mumbled as he looked at the blazing blades on the relics of him and the clansmen. The final defensive system that the Elvenheims tried to complete using the divine stone fragment, world tree, and the relics. Mana resonance wave. This was the original use for the relic, though the Elvenheims didn't even get to use it. They were the first ones to be able to see its might. There wasn't much room for leisure. All the mana vessels in his body were squeaking. He had to finish this before his mana vessels turned into a mess. Hansu charged forward. Chapter 74, Incursion 4. You had a hata. Liu Hong laughed out loudly as he aggressively swung the bright blade in his hands. Qualia. A bright blade light from Liu Hong's hand chopped the charging army apart like a wave. Wajajajak. It's amazing. The artifact he had was something that wouldn't stand out anywhere he went, but the bright blade in his hand was on a different dimension. Wouldn't I be able to cut the root with this strength? A destructive force that felt like it could penetrate the thick skin of the root that previously made him give up could be felt in his hand. If it's this much then, I think we can go out of the root without many casualties. Even if the zombie-like things in front of his eyes were strong, and even if they had relics in their hands, they would die once they were cut into pieces as long as they were life forms. And the sword in his hand was strong enough to slice apart those things without any problems. He just needed to take care of these guys, cut apart the root, and then go outside. But Liu Hong realized that the situation wasn't as good as he thought as he swung his sword. Kyujujuduk. Hansu swung Galadriel's relic. The golden magic force from the relic, which had received a large amount of energy from the divine stone fragment, rushed towards the Elvenheims, charging towards him. Kajuduk. The Elvenheims tried to defend against that attack with the relics in their hands. But the golden magic force cut through their weapons and then cut their body into two as well. Damn! Though he had succeeded, it was not a satisfactory result. Hansu clicked his tongue inwardly. He wanted to split apart 6 of them with a single attack. But only 4 had died under the attack. The other 2 quickly moved out of the attack range, while the 4 defended against the attack. Maybe it's due to their bodies still being normal, but their movements are different. Though these guys didn't revive like the specters inside the Calamity Fish's stomach, they were much stronger since their bodies were normal. There were tens of thousands of these things. Those things were making sharp movements as they constantly pushed Hansu and the clansmen of Lighthouse back. Damn it, their recovery speeds are too fast. They heal back even if you cut off their limbs. Cut off their life in one strike, they don't seem immortal. Damn it, didn't these guys die yet? Where's the energy coming from? Similar shouts were being heard from all around. Even if their limbs were cut off from being attacked, these things just reattached the arm and charged again after healing up. Once you get cut apart, and then heal, the materials inside the body that were stored should run out, but they were constantly healing as if such a limit didn't exist. They would fall if you cut off their necks, but it meant that it was an army that wouldn't falter unless you cut their necks off or crush their hearts. The Lighthouse clansmen were holding them back well because their teamwork was great and they were used to fighting with each other. But if things continued at this pace, then they will get trampled. Since the Elvenheims were staying very energetic, unlike humans who would get tired. If they didn't have the mana resonance wave, then they would have been trampled already. Hansu looked towards the giant object that two large Elvenheims were protecting. As I thought, I have to crush that central heart. The giant central pumping heart had a similar role to the core of the calamity fish. Since it was inefficient to sustain such a huge body with a single heart, that object pumped nutritional fluid with the energy of the divine stone fragment infused within it towards every corner of the body. That thing's nutritional fluid was constantly being supplied to the Elvenheim soldiers through the floor of the root. As long as that heart was pumping, the Elvenheims will not cease to attack the clans. Let's go. Hansu spoke towards Michael, who was standing next to him. I'm gonna split away and then fight. Maintain the formation as well as possible and stay alive. Michael clenched his teeth and then nodded. Though they can maintain themselves, they wouldn't be able to push forward at this pace. They needed something that would turn the tide. Damn it, I don't know what you know, but I wish you success. Hansu left Michael, and then pushed his demonic dragon's reinforcement to the max as he lifted his body towards the air. At that moment, something rapidly flew towards Hansu. Kyujujuduk. Hansu aggressively swung his blade as he blocked the thing that was flying towards him. A single marble. A marble the size of a human's fist smashed into Hansu's sword as they created a huge shockwave. Surprisingly, the golden blade which could cut apart the Elvenheims could not get through the marble as the marble made grinding noises and tried to push Hansu back. Nope. Hansu condensed his mana reinforcement further, stepped on the head of an Elvenheim charging towards him, and used that acceleration to push back the marble. Crack. Then a crack occurred on the marble. As the crack appeared in the marble ceased attacking Hansu as it went back to its owner, towards one of the two Elvenheims that were guarding the heart. Then the 7 marbles that were spinning around the body of the Elvenheim made a bright light as they started to fly towards Hansu at an incredible speed. At the same time, the other member of the 5 great tiger generals activated the bracelet on his arm. Wung! Instantly, a translucent armor appeared all over the great tiger general with the bracelet. The 2 great tiger generals who had armed themselves with 2 relics started to make a loud noise as they charged towards Hansu. Boom 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 boom. As the 2, who were much larger than other Elvenheims, started to run towards him, it felt like the whole route was quaking. And Fabian, the great tiger general with the translucent armor, smashed at Hansu. Boom! Hansu slashed the mana blade created from the divine stone fragment, aggressively towards the translucent armor, but the armor resonated as it deflected Hansu's attack. Kyujuduk. The relics that Hansu and Fabian were using were originally Elvenheims. Though they didn't have the mana resonance wave, they were still using them to their fullest potential. And these guys are also constantly receiving energy through the central heart. Kiriwiruk. But as if the armor could not withstand the energy supplied from the divine stone fragment, Hansu's golden blade slowly dug into the translucent armor. At that time, something flew towards Hansu while making loud noises. Ekidrang's relic. 2 of the 7 marbles around Ekidrang remained back to defend the body. 4 of them aimed towards the fatal spots all over Hansu's body, and the remaining one rushed towards the wrist which held Galadriel's relic. Hansu frowned as he quickly retrieved his sword that was slashing down onto Fabian's armor. At the same time, he activated the power destruction on Nirmaha's ring on his right hand. Kiriwirik. Nirmaha's ring, which was supplied with a much larger amount of mana than before, exploded with a red light. Hansu then changed the sword, which was infused with both red and golden light, like a whip, and then lashed the air. Pajujuduk. The energy which was on the 5 of the marbles that were flying towards him disappeared from the power destruction. Crack. The marbles made crackling sound as cracks appeared. but the marble which had withstood the attack pushed in, and then smashed into Hansu's body. Poke! Kuhuk! He had dodged 4, but he couldn't dodge the remaining one after losing his balance, since Ekedrang's relic was too fast for that. Hansu breathed out roughly from the pain that ran throughout his body. At that moment, Fabian, who had been pushed back from Hansu's attack, trusted his armor as he charged towards Hansu. Boom 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 boom. Damn it! It felt like his mana veins were burning up. It was too burdensome to use the Galadriel's relic as well as Nirmaha's ring at the same time. But if he didn't use both then, he wouldn't be able to stop the guy charging towards him like a bear. Hansu quickly backed off as he applied the power destruction onto the golden blade, and then slashed at Fabian's armor. Krug! The armor made breaking sounds as a crack appeared. The golden blade went through that crack. Then it changed its form quickly as it started to grind up the insides of Fabian. Kijijijijek. At that time, the bracelet on Fabian's wrist shined as the armor shrunk down. The armor, which had shrunk down to barely cover Fabian's skin, did its best to resist the golden blade attack from Galadriel's sword, and Hansu's sword shone brighter as it tried to cut off Fabian's life. Pachachik. The divine stone fragment supplied energy to the point, as if it was going to explode. The golden blade blazed up as it started to crush down the translucent armor. The central heart constantly supplied energy, but it could not compare to the energy from the divine stone fragment. At that moment, a bright light exploded out as a huge crack appeared on Fabian's armor, and a limb was cut off. I need to finish him now. Even if the armor was regenerating from the energy that was supplied, there were still loose ends. The moment Hansu tried to swing his golden blade to cut off the neck, a large sound wave was heard. Qualia. Got him, Nit. He would be able to cut off that guy's neck if he swung his sword, but then his whole body would get crushed by the marble flying towards him to assassinate him. Since his body wasn't a demonic dragoneer's, Hansu dodged Ekedrang's marble flying towards him as he jumped back. Shuraruk. In that short instant, the armor quickly regenerated the crack from the constant energy supply, as Fabian's right arm reattached from the nutritional fluid supplied through the ground by the central heart. Hansu clenched his teeth as he saw this scene. He's not even a lizard. If this were to continue, then there would be no end. The body, which did not go through the racial metamorphosis, was getting destroyed from within from the wave-like mana, as 2 great tiger generals armed with 2 relics, and backed up with the energy supply from the central heart, were charging towards him. He tried to get through the 2 great tiger generals first and smash the heart, while the clan was holding the others back, but their cooperation was much more annoying than he had expected. Even if I gained some damage, smash the heart. Hansu looked at the pumping central heart in the distance, which was the size of a small building, clenched his teeth, and then rushed out. Wung! The plant, which was slowly and very minutely regenerating. At that moment, the devouring and vomiting root's main body, which was doing its best to regenerate the plant, frowned. Since the plentiful amount of divine stone fragments' energy seemed very lacking suddenly. Though it had been pouring all the energy from the fragment into the plant, but fixing things was not its strong point. While it was using up the energy extremely inefficiently, a great force wave was felt from the root in the distance. An existence that was using the energy much more efficiently than him, though it was much less. The main body started to focus in order to sense and learn the flow of that energy. Chapter 75, Plant 1. Kyujujuduk. Ekedrang's relic flew towards Hansu, who was running, while stepping on top of heads like a meteor. Kagagugu. Hansu rapidly swung his sword as he aimed the golden blade towards the marble. Krug. The blazing sword cut the relic in 2. But Hansu quickly lowered his head as he dodged the relic. Since the relic that had been cut in 2 rushed up and tried to smash his head. Smart guy, it purposely loosened the mana wall. It had gotten rid of the mana wall, so it would be cut more easily, and then tried to hit Hansu with the speed. and as soon as that guy failed, it was looking for another chance. The marble that had been cut in two had long regenerated. Ekidrang looked for another chance as he aggressively pushed in. If you do that, then the story changes. Hansu carefully looked at the marble that was flying towards him. And the moment the marble almost reached him, he put away his sword. At the same time, he stepped on the marble flying towards him and poured in a large amount of strength. Boom! Q-hug. The pain felt like his leg bones were breaking, which meant that it wasn't quite enough to break his legs. If it was covered with mana, then they would have been smashed apart, but that thing had disabled the mana wall. Hansu poured more strength into his thigh while stepping on the marble. Tujuduk. At the same time, Hansu's body quickly rushed towards the heart. Boom! The marbles constantly chased Hansu the flying Hansu and tried to assault his body, but Hansu barely dodged those attacks as he reached out with Galadriel's relic. Quajujujuduk. A sensation that he had felt like dissecting the cocoon inside the heart of the calamity fish could be felt on the edge of the sword. Such a hard and large amount of muscles, mucus and ligaments were covering the central heart. A situation where he had to dissect a building that was similar to a bomb shelter. But the relic that was in Hansu's hand, and the relic that was reborn from borrowing the energy from the divine stone fragment, was completely different in terms of strength. The heart instantly split apart from the golden blade while making ripping noises. At the same time, the heart that was pumping at a regular rate started to pump madly as it was agitated. The problem was that it wasn't the only thing that was agitated. The surrounding Elvenheim army also started to change according to the heartbeat. Tujujuduk. Muscles swelled up in the eye that was out of focus focused in. The ear that was hanging down but had been slightly raised due to the battle now rose up as if it was trying to pierce the heavens. And the two great tiger generals who had been leading the Elvenheims were the same. Fabian's body, which was already massive, covered his whole body, which had been enlarged a step further with mana walls as he charged towards Hansu. Hansu, who had been fervently slicing apart the heart, felt Fabian's fist cutting through the air behind him, but he did not dodge it. Actually, he just allowed the attack after tensing up all the muscles on his body. Kyujujuduk. Who up? Hansu felt his conscience shaking from the fist that felt like it was trying to drive into his body. The relic Fabian had was focused on defense, unlike Galadriel's sword, but once the powerful armor combined with his great physical ability, his body basically became a weapon in itself. But Hansu received Fabian's attack and then straightened his senses. He did not die. Though his side had been ripped off, that guy had gotten very close. I can't dissect the heart with this guy alive. Hansu then started to concentrate all of the golden light on the blade. The mana that was spreading in all directions from the relic, and the divine stone fragment started to gather onto his blade. The mana reinforcement got weaker. Is that Hansu guy okay? The people who had been fighting momentarily flinched when the mana wave suddenly turned weak. At that time Hansu, who had gathered as much mana which was spreading through the mana resonance wave as much as he could, slashed down the golden blade towards Fabian, since it felt like his body was going to explode if he gathered more. Chuea. The mana blade that Hansu had swung cut towards the charging Fabian's neck. Kagagaguk. Though the armor surrounding Fabian's neck was strong, it was not as strong as the attack Hansu risked his life for. Crack. A red line appeared on Fabian's neck. But Hansu frowned. It regenerated that too. Most Elvenheims stopped their movements when you cut off their necks. But Fabian's neck was healing, while the armor held the necks in place despite him having cut off his neck. It turns a life form into a monster. Boom! As Hansu was about to move his body in order to end Fabian completely, 7 marbles charged at him from the distance at an incredible speed. Ekidrang had sent out all the marbles, including the ones protecting his body, after getting nervous from seeing Fabian becoming immobile. Hansu clicked his tongue and then jumped into the heart he was slashing apart. Then he madly started to slash his sword in all directions. Jack! Ekidrang's relic followed Hansu into the heart and tried to rip Hansu apart, but it could not move like before, since the delicate structures might also get destroyed in the process of smashing Hansu. The heart was as big as a small building, but it was not big enough for Ekidrang's marbles, which flew like comets, to act freely. Hansu madly dodged and got hit by the marbles as he started to dig out the insides of the heart. The heart filled with more rage as it tried to control more of the Elvenheims to come towards the heart, but it was not enough. The hole Hansu had made on the hole was not really big. Though he was grinding things up inside, it was not big enough for countless Elvenheims to come in. The heart slowly lost its strength as it got destroyed step by step from the inside. Then a change occurred. These guys became incredibly slow, create some distance. They don't heal anymore, we don't need to fight them head-on, just assault them from afar. As the energy supply from the heart stopped, the regeneration speed slowed down as well as their movement speeds. Hansu finished off the heart and then quickly ran outside. Then he dashed towards Fabian, who had almost finished regenerating. Chwag. Fabian tried to resist, but he couldn't move since he needed a greater amount of energy than the others. Hansu's sword cut off his wrist. At the same time, the relic that was on his wrist fell off as well. The wrist had stronger protection from the armor than the other parts, but it couldn't be sustained after the energy supply had been cut off. Hansu quickly changed the form of the sword as he brought the bracelet that was on the wrist to himself. Then he quickly put it on. Hwan! The mana that was blazing inside Hansu, as if it wanted to explode, quickly calmed down. His control over the divine stone fragment had increased much more as the relics increased to 2. Like insisting that the control didn't merely multiply by 2 by having 2 relics, the powerful mana storm quickly calmed down under Hansu's control. Who? Hansu sighed in relief as he saw his mana veins quickly calming down. The amount of mana that would be used up would be twice the amount if he were to control both. He would be able to supply more mana since having 2 relics allowed him to control the divine stone fragment with much more ease. It's amazing, Hansu mumbled inwardly as he saw the mana blade that blew up to the point where it was about to explode. It was like his when he had only gathered 2. He couldn't even imagine what he would be able to do if he were to collect all 5 relics and attain the complete administrator's powers. Hansu, who had been looking at the mana that had been pouring all over his body, looked at Ekidrang in the distance having a hard time controlling the 7 beads, and then quickly charged towards him. Huak. Michael looked at the surrounding clansmen as he breathed in and out harshly. Though they were all gasping for air from the battle ended very quickly despite them struggling until now. Since the Elvenheim had all lost their strength and fallen down the moment the heart was crushed. And one more thing. Michael looked at his sword that was shining much brighter than before. A lot more mana is being supplied than before. Michael then looked towards the origin of the cause. 7 marbles floating around him, a new bracelet and the sword he previously had. He, who had obtained many new things, was a lot different from before. The sensation of him pushing his limits could not be felt as the energy that was being sent their way was greatly amplified. And around his body, larger fragment pieces than the ones before were floating around his body. He reminds me of a pylon. Memories of a game he used to play a long time ago, StarCraft, came back to him. Michael looked at Hansu and asked, "What are you going to do now?" Hansu laughed as he spoke. "You've been to dungeons many times, it's the same. The plant has shut down. Though a few remaining beasts would still be around, and the difficulty of them would still be high, but it really wouldn't be that burdensome, since he would be able to control the divine stone fragment with the 3 relics. It's working out better than I expected." At that time, the captain of the shock troopers who was standing next to Michael approached him and whispered something in his ears. It seems like he had seen something with a skill. Michael's expression turned grim as he heard this. Didn't you say that the beasts won't come out anymore? MMM. When Hansu made a confused expression, Michael spoke with a frozen expression. I checked with the skill because we had gotten closer, but there's no need for words. Just see it for yourself. Michael then transferred the image from the skill of the captain of the search team, Moon's Chaser, to Hansu. The image of the view the captain of the search him had seen could be seen on the mirror that he was holding. A building that had remnants of an explosion, but still had a decent look. And the beasts that were slowly being recreated inside it. Though all the cultivation containers weren't working as if it wasn't fully healed, but from one look, one could tell that strong things were being produced. And the speed was getting faster as well. Damn it, those are things that appear at the end of the dungeon of the base route. Michael muttered inwardly. Though the 5 calamities were strong, there were plenty of other monstrous things other than them. And such things were slowly being produced from the plant. While Michael was making a grim expression, Hansu also frowned slightly. The fairy shouldn't have intervened. It shouldn't have known that he had come to the past. And if it was going to intervene, then it would have done so in the beginning. Since he wouldn't even have been able to come back to the past if they had intervened at the crystal in his past life. Did the main body sense and learn the mana wave? That was highly likely. Don't we need to escape? Hansu shook his head at Michael's words. Though it was a giant beast that looked like it didn't have much in its brains, it was not stupid. It would constantly watch and learn. You would not be able to make it fall into the same trap twice. He would need to prepare for the plant even more next time, and there would be no way to penetrate through the beasts if the plant wasn't shut down. But there's no need to face them all. There was no actual need to fight. He needed to buy time since he had obtained the relic. Can you hold on to your breath for a bit? What? The moment Michael replied, Hansu pushed the power of the relic in his hand to the limit. Then he slashed at the root around them. Boom! The line of light that had been strengthened from the divine stone fragment made a hole in the tunnel surrounding them just like that. Then toxic waters started to pour out from those locations. The outer tunnel that sucked in the toxic waters. If we ride this, then we'll get there in an instant. Huh? Michael looked at the tube full of the toxic water that was headed towards an unknown location and made a bitter expression. Then he thought to himself, do we need to take such risks to help that guy? But Michael just shook his head. They wouldn't be able to get out from here only by relying on their own strength, without the relics that guy was holding. And that guy didn't have any thoughts of leaving before he ended this, so they had to see the end, no matter what happened to them. Damn it, I've been caught badly. It had been a long time since he felt the pain of seeing blood, once you provoked a dangerous fellow to the bones. Michael clenched his teeth and started moving. The main body was lost in thoughts, as it was learning the mana wave that it had sensed inside the root. A power that a strange guy had shown. It wasn't enough to deal with that guy with the beasts it had now. It needed a different method. Though it was creating beasts for defense, but the power it held now was equal to their creator who had created test subjects like them. It knew instinctively why the guy at the sea had gotten quiet. It didn't know what would happen once that guy were to charge in like this. The main body stopped the regeneration of the plant momentarily as it started to focus the energy into a different location. To create the clone alpha that it hadn't created up until now because it felt scruples to do so. Chapter 76, Plant 2. Quagagagaga. A bit over 100 people clenched their teeth within the aggressively rushing toxic waters. Damn it, it's really rough. Though the inner tunnel that they were moving in was large, but the outer tunnel that was sucking in the toxic waters was even larger. The people, who felt like they would get swept off from the rapid waters of the river, held onto their hands tight in order to not lose each other. We might just die if we lose each other. These people activated all sorts of skills to survive, and used the strength that had reached the red stage to hold onto each other tight. And in between them, the 7 marbles were constantly roaming around, held them in place, and prevented them from crashing into the walls by slightly changing the directions. Damn it, I'm not sure if we are going to all die or not. While Michael was cursing out in his mind, a light could be seen in the distance. A light that started from the end point of the giant tunnel. We've arrived. Hansu controlled the marbles, Ekidrang's relic, to burst out and quickly approach the wall. If they were to get swept into the plant, then they would just all melt from the plant's processes. He had to make a hole to escape before then. Ki-ying. The golden blade in Hansu's hand exploded aggressively. Hansu stabbed the blade that had been extended into tens of meters into the wall. Kagagagagak. Ho-oop. It felt like the flesh in his hands was about to explode. The blade that was created from Galadriel's relic was strong, but the tunnel near the main body was much thicker and tougher than in the beginning, and the current was extremely strong. Hansu tightly clenched onto Galadriel's relic in order to not lose it due to the current, as he activated Ekidrang's relic to hold himself in place. Kiajajajajek. Hansu's efforts weren't in vain, as his velocity quickly slowed down despite being in the water. And in the spot that Hansu had gone past, a cut of tens of meters had been left behind. The devouring and vomiting root that had gained quite a large injury screamed out in pain. Since it would be impossible for even something like it to not feel any pain once the root that acted as a vein had been scratched like that. At that moment, an enormously large explosion occurred behind him. Michael and his clansmen, who had been behind Hansu, had used all their strength to send out skills. Though it was hard for over 100 people to activate skills at the same time, but they did it in a single try as they sent out a powerful attack towards a direction. They used the reaction force from that to push themselves out of the toxic waters as they were driven towards the outside of the root. Quaya, Kuha cough, Hua hua. Though the root circulating the toxic waters had been floating tens of meters in the sky, there wasn't anybody who would die by falling from such a height. The people who came out from the toxic waters landed on the ground and then grinded their teeth as they caught their breath. Got 'em it never again. But unlike those clansmen, Michael instead quickly looked at his surroundings. A wide open area. 2 different kinds of roots could be seen above them. The giant root of the world tree that they were familiar with, and the root they came out from, that was stuck beneath the world tree root like a parasite. Their gazes naturally fell towards the location where the root extended to, and the thing that was located at the end. It's huge. Beneath the location of the world tree root, a gigantic structure was located. Though they had checked it with a skill previously, seeing it in front of their eyes like this was much different. For something like this to be under the world tree. At the same time, the other thing could only come into their eyes. A giant life form that was surrounding that giant structure. Beasts were slowly crawling out from all around that life form that seemed like the main body of the route they were on until now. Hansu started to prepare the mana inside his body after seeing this. The objective was the same as before. He had to pull out the divine stone fragment before the plant fully recovered. Get through it quickly, stick behind me well. Got 'em net, even if you say it. Michael grinded his teeth as he saw the beasts swarming towards them from the distance. At that time, the relics that were around Hansu flew up like a storm and smashed the life form's head. Boom! The relic which had devoured a large amount of energy from the divine stone fragments smashed apart the life form's head and then returned next to Hansu. It's not that bad. I told you I'll fulfill your wishes for you to kill this thing. I shouldn't make wishes so quickly from now on. The atheist Michael found God who he hasn't searched for in 2 years again in his mind, as he prepared the formation of his troops while looking at the charging beasts. Kujujuduk. The man who had raised himself out from the cultivation liquid looked at his surroundings. A man who had the form of an Elvenheim. but unlike a normal Elvenheim, he had a strange aura coming off of him. At that exact moment, a voice was transferred into his head from above. To go out and get rid of the intruders. The man looked upwards. The thing that was extending huge roots in all directions. That thing was definitely within his memories. Devouring and vomiting root, that was something I gave power to. And because of this, the man started to feel angry. How dare such a thing give him orders? The main body of devouring and vomiting root blinked its eyes as if the man's actions made it uncomfortable. Even that guy was a clone that was created with the creator's cells as the basis. Its abilities couldn't even compare to him. But for such a thing to act with such insolence, the thing that made it worse was that he couldn't give orders to it because it was created with the creator's cells as the basis. The devouring and vomiting root had created the clone in time, but it didn't know how he would act since he wasn't bound to its orders. There was a reason why it hadn't made it until now. While the two were getting on each other's nerves, the one who spoke first was the man. "You have the key to the arsenal here, right? Give it to me." One of the two treasures of Elvenheim, arsenal. According to the cloned man's memory, he had given it to this guy to store. "I gave the position to control the plant to you back then. I know it's here." As the devouring and vomiting root kept giving off dissatisfied feelings, the man grinded his teeth. "This dumbass, I need that thing to block the guy outside. Hurry and give it to me." The man was realizing the fact that the outside situation wasn't great. It seems like the plant wasn't working properly because it received some kind of damage. It meant the situation was bad enough to the point where it couldn't focus on healing back the plant and had to constantly squeeze beasts out. And the beasts created didn't seem like they had the upper hand either, since large screams of beasts were being heard outside along with loud booms. How could this be? These guys are danger level 12. They came to kill it. The most dangerous beast created from the plant was level 7. But on the other hand, the others, including the calamity fish, were level 12. Level 12 was dangerous enough to threaten a whole race to extinction, and had done so already. The man frowned as if he was flustered. Then the main body, which was constantly detecting the outside information with a root that acted as an antenna, started to open its octopus-like beak from within its body as if it couldn't hold it back anymore. Kagagagugu. As the giant mouth that was hundreds of meters in diameter opened, hundreds of tentacle-like roots reached down. And in the spots where the two roots had extended from, two objects were located there. One was the divine stone fragment that shone brightly as it supplied the main body with the energy it needed. The other was a strange-looking key the size of a finger. The main body used one of the hundreds of roots as a hand as it pulled the silvery key up. Then it stretched it down to the man below and gave it to him. Good, anyways, this insolent bastard." The man spun the key on his hand, and then coldly laughed as he looked at the divine stone fragment above him. While the devouring and vomiting root made a strange noise as if it didn't feel good after seeing the man's smile, the man stabbed the key into the air above him and then spun it leftward. Boom! Hansu blocked one of the countless roots flying towards him with Ekidrang's relic. Chererik. Though tens of roots were flying towards him, he could estimate the movements of some. Hansu blocked off the root as he thought inwardly. "As I thought, the defensive system is weaker than the calamity fish." The thin roots of the devouring and vomiting root looked like the tentacles inside the calamity fish at a simple glance, but the difference in power was great. Though there was still a very big problem left. There was a reason why the defensive system was so weak. It was weak because it wasn't needed. Guru. An ogre that was the size of a 3-story building smashed down onto the ground with a bludgeon that reached tens of meters. Boom! A huge vibration ran out in all directions as the ground wavered up and down. The 7 marbles were busy blocking off the roots reaching down from the sky. He had to face it directly. A golden light reached out long from Hansu's blade. Boom! Hansu attacked the bludgeon that was flying around in all directions. Shugunk! The bludgeon was cut off and landed at a different location. Kuwu! The giant ogre made a flustered expression, and then made a vicious expression, and tried to swing its bludgeon again, as if it was trying to smash the ants in front of its eyes. Though it didn't really matter much. Chirg! By the time Hansu finished swinging his sword, the bludgeon and the ogre's neck, which were in the area of the swing of the sword, had long been cut off. Kyu! It then fell down to the ground. Ikil, who was fighting in the distance, saw that beast, focused, and then shouted out loud. "We can win, we're almost there." Then they looked towards the thing that was shining brightly in the distance. A bright light that was guiding them like a lighthouse. The same thing as what Hansu was holding onto. "We win if we pull that thing out, huh?" Hansu had told them. The thing that was supplying the giant body with energy was that thing. Everything will be solved if they get there and pull it out. At that moment Michael flinched. Then the plant will stop working. Then what would the other adventurers hunt to get stronger with? But at that moment a change occurred. Kuwaya. Huh. A huge shockwave was created from somewhere inside, where the divine stone fragment was shining along with a loud exploding noise. And not long after that sound was heard, the lights of the plant started to turn off. At the same time, the hundreds of thin roots that were attacking them constantly shrugged down as they lost their strength. This. Hansu frowned. He had seen this before. At the Calamity Fish's heart. It meant that somebody had pulled the divine stone fragment from inside the devouring and vomiting root. Who? At that moment, a voice was transferred into his mind. Shall we see each other's face after leaving those trashes behind? I want to know who you are and how you are using the key so adequately. Key, he knows the name. To call the relic the key. Of course, the original name of the relic was the 5 keys, so key was correct. But there shouldn't be anyone but him who knew this here. Since the only people who called it that were the Elvenheim, and only the high rankers at that. Stay here. Ha hey. Hansu left Michael's shouts behind him as he moved forward. Chapter 77, Plant 3. First time seeing these guys, how are their skills? The clone, Alpha, mumbled as he looked at the people in the distance. There were around 150 people. Though it was the first time he saw that race, it didn't really matter much. The important part was their power. Alpha laid down a conclusion after looking at the mana wave and the fight. That the strongest person over there was around level 6. But they were probably at around level 6.5 due to the leaked weapons from 1,000 soldier armors, the arsenal. Others were distributed around level 4 and 5. They're just bugs. Alpha stopped caring about them. Then his gaze turned to the guy he had called. That guy that's running to me, he should be around danger level 9. He would probably be around level 6 without the relics. But he had the relics of Galadriel, Ekidrang, and Fabian of the 5 great tiger generals. He would be around level 9 since he was efficiently supplying and using the divine stone fragments. The might of the relics was that great. He's really fascinating. Not everyone could use it like that. Even if one was to obtain both the relic and the divine stone fragment, they needed a huge amount of minute mana control in order for their bodies to not blow up. As if he had been using mana for decades. Just from the mana control, he seemed equal to himself. If you take into account who the original of the clone is, then the fact that the guy over there was similar to him was something amazing. But Alpha shook his head. Something's missing, he has more. To kill the Calamity Fish with just that. Impossible. Killing the Calamity Fish from the outside was of course impossible, and even if someone were to act inside its body like this, it would still not be possible. Since the inner defenses of the Calamity Fish were at least at level 10. And somehow he had fried the plant as well. Shall we see his hidden cards then? The king's treasure that acted as the arsenal that would arm his soldiers, the 1,000-soldier armors. There wouldn't any problems, though he could only use one of the 5 different kinds of weapons, since there were enough gears in there to arm millions of soldiers. I guess I'll need to borrow the powers of the divine stone fragment. Alpha raised the key in his hand, 1,000-soldier armors, and made a motion of stabbing it in the air and turning it right. Hansu moved quickly as he went towards the center of the devouring and vomiting root, where the divine stone fragment should be. At that moment, a large amount of things started to pour down on Hansu. This bastard, playing around after telling me he wanted to see me. Even if that guy had set up a plan, he still had to advance if he didn't want to miss the divine stone fragment. Hansu poured all the energy from the surrounding divine stone fragments into Fabian's relic. Hwan. A tremendous amount of marble started to smash at the formless armor created around his body. Huge in numbers but smaller in size than Ekidrang's, the marbles surrounded Hansu and madly started to tear him apart. Hansu urgently checked his surroundings, while Fabian's formless armor was getting shredded. Main body. I need to find the main body. At that moment, something came into Hansu's view. A blurry image could be seen among the silvery clouds. Hansu aggressively swung Galadriel's blade towards the distant location. Krug. The divine stone fragment supplied a huge amount of energy. The moment the golden light extended away from the sword, the marbles in the air moved and started to block the blade. Kijijijijek. Though as each individual marble was weaker than Ekidrang's, they were crushed the moment they made contact. But as tens of thousands of these blocked the path of the golden light, the light eventually lost its strength and disappeared. Tusk. He had expected this. Hansu, who had foreseen that it wouldn't end simply like this, increased the mana in his body and tried to quickly charge through. Since he needed to crush his opponent before his body would get shredded apart by the silvery cloud's attacks. If all fails, use the mana code. But the cloud that seemed like it was about to attack Hansu any moment just calmly floated around the air after attacking and defending once, as if it saw everything it needed to see. Was it a test or something? As Hansu walked past the silvery marble cloud, a single Elvenheim was waiting for Hansu. The man greeted him as soon as he saw Hansu. Hello, it wasn't much. I just called you over because I got interested. The man was looking at him with a laid-back expression, as if he had gotten relaxed even further than before. Hansu realized the man's identity as soon as he saw him. He had heard a lot of things from the Elvenheims he had met in the abyss. Of course, he had also heard about the Fallen One, who caused the calamities to appear in this world. It was clear that he was a clone, since there was no way that guy would be here. Devouring and vomiting root, it seems that it was surprised. It would of course have the genetic information of their creator, the Fallen One. But to clone that kind of guy, even if it could have guessed more or less things would turn like this. That's why you get cleaned out. Hansu coldly gazed at the clone who was spinning the key around. The clone had a giant divine stone fragment on his right hand and a small key on his left hand. Hansu mumbled inwardly after looking at that. To control the divine stone fragment to that extent without the relics. He knew because he was also using the divine stone fragment and the relics. He understood how well that guy was controlling the divine stone fragment. Of course, that guy wasn't pulling out all the energy from the divine stone fragment. But if you take into account the amount of energy the fragment has, then that much was still fearsome. That guy was expertly pulling out a large amount of energy and pouring it towards a certain location. And Hansu knew where that large amount of energy was being poured into. The huge number of marbles floating behind him. Though they were smaller than the Ekidrang's relic Hansu had, they numbered in tens of thousands. Hansu frowned as he saw the floating marbles and the divine stone fragment in the clone's hands. Is that the arsenal I have heard about? Marbles like Ekidrang's relics were constantly being released from the open space behind the clone. That's the 7-star marbles that armed ordinary soldiers. Since it was an amount that could arm millions of people, the number was tremendous. And as I remember, the arsenal was seized before they could even arm the soldiers. The forgotten sword that Galadriel, Fabian, and Ekidrang's army had were distributed to everyone, but things like 7-star marbles or formless armor were all stored within the arsenal if it was not during a time of war. The reason why the Elvenheim had lost against the war against Calamity Fish was that their arsenal had been seized before the soldiers could get armed with the other 4 gears, in exception to the sword. I don't even know what he has belief in. Hansu finished his thoughts as he looked at the clone. What are you thinking? Why would the guy who had attained the divine stone fragment call him over? The clone smiled as he spoke. What else? I need to now finish what I was doing, though you won't know about it. The Alpha looked at the relics floating around Hansu after he finished speaking. He was not stupid. He knew that he was just a clone. But that did not matter. His objective could be completed as long as his ability and memory was the same. And I need that thing for this. He would be able to create a foundation with those things, the second divine stone fragment he had, and the key 1,000 soldier armors in his hand. I'm just wondering if you could just give me the things you have. I was just born, so I don't really want to fight. Hansu didn't even reply as he started to rotate the mana within his body. An Alpha smirked after seeing this as if he had expected this outcome already, and flicked the key in his hand, which caused a larger amount of marbles than before to start pouring towards Hansu's body. Kyujujujujudo. It's a power that could even crush level 10s. The strength he had seen earlier was level 9. This much was enough to erase him without a trace. Alpha, while pouring in the mana wave created from the divine stone fragment towards the countless marbles, sent in the special mana code ordering to attack Hansu using the key in his hand. The reason why 1,000 soldier armors was the king's treasure. Normal soldiers could use the 5 different kinds of gears like the formless armor and the 7-star marbles from the arsenal only when the king allows them to. If the 5 keys that the 5 great generals had, the key, signified the might of the world tree, then the key that the king had, 1,000 soldier armors, had powers over the miniature versions of the 5 relics. If the 1,000 soldier armors didn't allow the 5 gears to work, then they would all stop working. The reason why he didn't care about the bugs in the distance with the relics was because of this, since he could stop them at his will. At that moment the clone freaked out. Kiriwiruk. Ook. Something was quickly invading through the 7-star marbles that were being controlled with his mana wave. To be precise, the marbles that were controlled by his mana waves were lost from his command and started to tilt as soon as they entered the mana wave created from the relic and the fragments. And of course, once the silvery marbles got weaker, Hansu swung the golden sword light as he charged at him. The clone spat out loudly unintentionally because he was so flustered. What the hell? How do you know the mana code? The mana code that was only inscribed on the 1,000 soldier armors that ruled over the 5 gears was flowing from Hansu's mana wave, as it was destroying the mana flow within the 7-star marbles. And because of he could not control them properly. Hansu, who had heard the scream-like shout, thought of the conversation he had with the Elvenheims he had met at the Abyss. If you find the arsenal that we failed to retrieve, then pour in your mana like so. Then you will be able to pull out the gears from inside it and be able to put it on other people. Didn't know that I'll get to use it like this. He didn't really expect much since the Elvenheims didn't know about the location of the arsenal either. But to find it like this. So all of this comes into my possession if I cut off your neck right. Then his future plans would become much easier. He would have been smashed apart if he didn't know the code, but it wasn't hard to approach him once he knew the code. Hansu, who had been smiling coldly, looked at the clone who had entered his range and slashed down the golden sword. Quarerek. The golden blade cut through the air as it accelerated towards the clone. At this moment the clone gnashed his teeth, stabbed the key onto the air again, and then spun it the other way. If one spun it rightwards, then the arsenal's space will get opened, and a large amount of gears will pour out. But when he turned it leftwards, something different happened. Charururuk. The moment the key spun in midair, all the surrounding air was flipped inside out as it created a silvery ripple. This ripple started from the clone's hand, which held onto the key, started to climb up the clone's arm, and then covered his whole body. Boom! The golden blade smashed down onto the silver armor, but it was so tough to the point where not even a scratch was created. Hansu freaked out once he saw the extremely familiar form of the armor. UK Weapon Eater. Weapon Eater. Solo numbering 6. An invincible armor that grew by eating up gears. Hansu was shocked from the appearance of an armor that could be found in the upper zones. The complete piece was here, the complete piece of Weapon Eater. Artifacts were mostly just copies of things that existed somewhere in some world, since it was just something that was resupplied as a reward from the fairy. The reason why numerous items of the same kind could exist was this. And since the location where the copy of Weapon Eater was found was not here, this meant that the thing over there is the original. Though he had heard about the key form of the arsenal, and the fact that a special armor of the king was hidden in it, but he didn't know that the armor was the Weapon Eater's original version. Another reason came up for me to kill him. Hansu's eyes shone at the unexpected find. Chapter 78, Racial War 1. Boom! Hansu started to madly smash down the armor in front of his eyes. The clone stared at the attacks pouring at him, and then started to grind his teeth. Damn it, it's really annoying. The 1,000-soldier armor could only be strong. It was obvious, since it was an armor made to protect the king. Being protected by the 1,000-soldier armor, and commanding the soldiers armed with the gears inside the 1,000-soldier armor. Though the armor was fitting to be the king's treasure, it was impossible for him to beat that guy with this current body during this situation, where he didn't have any soldiers, and the 7-star marbles were being negated from the mana code. This won't do, I need to get out. The clone grinded his teeth. That guy over there was not in a rush. Though the armor was protecting him for now, he will get pummeled to death eventually. He could not die in such a place. I cannot fail. He didn't even know where or what his original was doing. But from what he had seen, it seemed like he had failed his objectives in this place, since something like this wouldn't have had happened if he was alive. I cannot die here, for the 1.6 billion of my people who are waiting for my success. He had come over to this world with only his soul because of this. And because of this, he had fought against all of the Elvenheims here by himself, for the survival of his race. I will end it all. The clone clenched his teeth. Damn it, though I don't want to give up 1,000-soldier armor. The clone shouted. Succession of the 1,000-soldier armor. As soon as those words ended, the armor that was surrounding the clone started to disassemble at an extreme speed. Then it followed the golden blade light that was smashing at him and stretched towards Hansu. The silvery scales quickly moved onto Hansu's body from the clone's body. And soon Hansu's body was completely covered with the king's armor, 1,000-soldier armor. Kujujuduk. Hansu tried to move, but the silvery armor became a prison and did not let Hansu move. Power succession. A stage during when the 1,000-soldier armor checks the owner for their qualifications for the armor. He had attained the power over the 1,000-soldier armor like this through the same process. The equipped person will go through the test for the qualifications to become the owner of the 1,000-soldier armor while being inside it. Though 7 out of 10 people will usually die in that dangerous process, but he didn't think that Hansu will fail at all. Kiriwirirek. The clone quickly turned his head as he saw the armor squeaking already. If that guy equips the armor, then his battle power will rise up to around level 10. Though he won't be at level 12 like the Calamity Fish and reach the disaster level, but he will be strong enough to go against a whole castle and its inhabitants. If 100 came at him, then all 100 of them will be killed. Escape through teleportation. Since the devouring and vomiting root had stopped its movements, it was now possible to teleport. Even if he was a clone and did not have the leaf of the world tree, it would still be possible for a single body to teleport with the cells in his body. I guess I won't be able to take the divine stone fragment. The clone frowned. The divine stone fragment had a lock casted on it to prevent teleportation through the world tree to prevent theft. It was obvious, since it'll be a disaster if some crazy person were to charge in and teleport away with the divine stone fragment. The clone madly dashed upwards. He had thought of putting the divine stone fragment back inside the devouring and vomiting root, but he might get caught if he were to do that. The clone, which had ran past the main body of the devouring and vomiting root, laid his hands on the world tree root that was located above it. Kiyang. The world tree root, which was gaining back some of its original color after the devouring and vomiting root had disappeared, activated in reaction to the clone's body. I shall see you later. The clone grinded his teeth as he saw the guy finishing off the succession. He and that guy were not compatible. It seemed like that guy was collecting relics and divine stone fragments. He needed the relics and the divine stone fragments that guy had for his race. Damn it, how did the original body fail? The only remaining memories left were himself giving the genetic information to the devouring and vomiting root. He had no way of knowing what the original had done after that. Since the world tree had dried up and the Elvenheim had been destroyed, it seemed like his objective was almost complete. But why wasn't there a single sight of his own race? First, I will go to the flower. Then the clone's body completely disappeared. Soon the silvery armor that was making squeaking noises and was pressing down onto Hansu's body, as if it was trying to crush it, had stopped. Then it quickly disassembled and started to collect within his hand. Then a small silver key appeared in Hansu's hand. Hansu quickly checked his surroundings in order to get an idea of his current situation. Tusk, it ran away. Since he had left behind the divine stone fragment, it seemed like he had escaped through teleportation. Since there was no way he would not take that thing if he was going to run. Karawuruk. Hansu stabbed the key onto the air and then spun it rightwards. Then a black hole appeared in the air. When he focused, all the surrounding 7-star marbles all started to get sucked into the hole. I don't think I can even use it to attack. It was burdensome to sustain the mana wave alone. There was no way for him to use the 7-star marbles to attack like the clone when a simple retrieving order hurt his head so much. The reason why the clone was able to use these things to attack was because he was made of the cells of a very special person. It was better for him to just send that focus onto his relics and fighting with those. Hansu organized his thoughts and then spun the key leftwards. Kiriwiruk. Then silvery scales instantly covered all of Hansu's body. One of the 2 king's treasures. 1,000-soldier armor. Maybe it was due to the others being replicas. The features were similar to the weapon eater he knew. It would grow by eating up gears. It would get harder and harder, and change its color once enough has been devoured and turn into an artifact of zones above. It would evolve once it ate thousands and thousands of gears. It only ate the good materials from those gears, and then creates an armor that fit the user's body. Of course, it showed off a much higher hardness and mana conductivity compared to other armors, and a special ability of the 1,000-soldier armor. Hansu took out the forgotten sword from the arsenal and then lightly swung it towards his body. Kagagaguk. As soon as he swung the sword, the surface of the armor changed to a form that was suitable to resist the attack. Tung. As I expected, it would show an increased defense against weapons it had eaten or one similar to it. It seemed like it had eaten the forgotten sword before, since it already had resistance against it. An armor that was faithful to its job as armor. though there weren't many more extra skills, but it was to Hansu's liking because of this. I don't think I need to feed it more. As it seemed, the 1,000-soldier armor had already evolved to the peak of the red stage. It would actually be more troublesome if it evolved further, since his runes were still red. Hansu stopped hitting the armor and then thought of the plan from now. The next plan was to kill the third calamity. There was only one thing he needed to do at the root here. First, I need to weaken the Ouroboros. Ouroboros, the third calamity that was so huge that it tied itself around the world tree trunk. He needed a bit preparation to go against that giant snake. First, the poison. Hansu quickly ran towards the lower parts of the world tree root. As the two calamities who sucked onto its toxic waters disappeared, the world tree was draining a much higher amount of toxic waters that couldn't even be compared to the amount before. Kwarururu. Hansu gathered the surrounding corpses and quickly started to assemble them, since there was a huge amount of corpses around the plant due to the battle. Hansu, who had combined this and that, mixed in the baby's heart he gained before and created a black liquid. Then he chopped up the world tree root with Galadriel's relic. Shugaguk. Hansu poured in the liquid in his hands after seeing the flow of the toxic waters heading towards the trunk on the inner parts. That's completed. The assembled poison that had flowed wasn't that poisonous by itself. But once it touches the toxic waters, then it would react and change into something fatal towards the Ouroboros. There wasn't much time left until this poison will enter into the stomach of the Ouroboros, who would be sucking out the toxic waters with his fangs biting into the inner trunk parts. Hundreds of thousands of tons of toxic waters will be turned into something fatal and enter its stomach. Though this isn't even close to enough. Actually, he had planned to do as much as he did up to this point. But it seemed like he would need to change his plans from this point on, since something unexpected happened. A clone Hwan. Hansu frowned. Though that guy was a clone, he would still have a lot of powers, since it had the cells of the original. He had known as soon as he saw him running away through teleportation. I don't know what kind of tricks he will use. The only thing he had heard from the Elvenheim was that the Fallen One had tried to use the calamities to turn the world tree into a mess and force the Elvenheim into extinction. The Elvenheims didn't know either as to why their king had suddenly gone mad and tried to massacre them all. Tusk, there's a limit. Elvenheims and humans both, they were both races that had failed and roamed around the abyss. Those who lost because they didn't know something and because they did lack something. Of course, there was no way for them to know everything about that world. His job was to run while filling up those lacking gaps. Though I guess I know one thing. He had no way of knowing what kind of thoughts he had and what he would do. He also didn't know how much of a difference in power the clone had to the original. But the actions of the clone was clear. It had targeted the relic in his hands, which meant that the clone needed the relic in his hands for his objective and would definitely come find him. I don't know if his appearance made things easier or harder. He had gained a lot from that guy's appearance. With the 1,000-soldier armor, 3 relics and the divine stone fragments, then he would easily be able to get through the defense system of the calamity fish that he had barely passed through after pouring in the poison. He was a level stronger overall than when he used racial metamorphosis. He had also attained the arsenal, and the gears within it was a huge profit. But he didn't know how and when the guy, who clearly had evil intentions towards him, will affect him. I guess I should look around a bit then. If that guy were to use some tricks, then a clue will pop up somehow. I guess I need to receive some help. Anyways, how will they react? People will row the same directions when they were on the same boat, but the story changes once the boat arrives. Hansu collected the divine stone fragment and then quickly moved towards Michael, who was loitering in the distance. Top of the world tree. Though it had dried up, it still soared above the clouds. A single flower had bloomed at the top of this. though it seemed small in comparison to the giant world tree, but this pink flower easily reached over 1 km in size. And a man was standing on the edge of the world tree, where the flower was attached onto. The clone who had run away using teleportation. But the clone was making quite a troubled expression. Entrance is not allowed. The living area that was only allowed to King's flower was covered with tens of thousands of petals, as if it wasn't going to let anyone enter. Though it looked beautiful from a point of view, it was a construct made from a huge amount of energy. If somebody who isn't granted access touches it, then they will ignite on fire and then burn away. There were only 2 people who could freely enter this place: King and the administrator who had collected the 5 keys and had the qualifications to ask for the throne. Even the 5 great tiger generals could not enter this place without the king allowing them so. And the clone was confident because of this, since his body was made of the original cell who was the king. But for him to not be able to enter, if he hadn't stopped because he felt ominous in the middle, then he would have burned off in an instant. Damn it, what happened? He had believed that memories were useless, but when a situation like this happened, he could only regret the blank memories. There was only one way now. I have to collect all the keys. The 3 relics that guy had. He had to kill that guy in order to collect them all. And he needed power to do that. A power that wasn't consisting of tricks, but rather strong enough to crush that guy whole in an instant. Teleportation is going to be a bit hard right now. There was too much strain on the body since it had teleported without the leaves and only through his power. But he did not have the time to wait for the cooldown. Go to our Ouroboros. The clone started to quickly run down the world tree. And the clone thought on the way down. Though he had no memories, but reality showed him. His race was not here. The original body had clearly failed. The failed original does not have the qualifications anymore. I shall receive that name now. The clone then thought of the original owner of his body and memories. The person who had been called the last king of Elvenheim in this world. Arentelheim. No, there was no need to use that name anymore. A name from much before then. The name before he had crossed over with his race's hopes and had been born in Elvenheim during the time when his race, Akaran, was going extinct due to a great disaster. Tekelin. Now I am Tekelin. Tekelin started to go down even quicker after completing his thoughts. In order to gain the power of Ouroboros, the giant snake that would have coiled around the pillar. Chapter 79, Racial War 2. What is floating around like this? Camille Rowe, who had been walking around the seaside, made a fatigued expression. The shore in the distance was already in chaos. Hey, don't rush in. We aren't lacking nutritional fluids anymore. The roots grew a bit more. Let's go to the wreckage. There was chaos everywhere. Maybe it was because the calamity fish had died, but the world tree was growing at a pace that was visible to the eye, and somehow the nutritional fluids were more abundant. If the roots grow at this pace, then we might really be able to save billions. But what's the point? You dumbass. You are the one who needs to survive. It had been days since she had searched around these roots after the calamity fish had died. But she could not find that Hansugai no matter what. And even more since she had to dodge the clansmen of the 6 pillars. Damn it, I need to know whether you're alive or not. She had even used her precious wish card that she had been saving just to find that guy. Thank you for saving me. There isn't a reward for anything, but call me once when you really need me. I shall help you then. Oh, except killing the calamity fish. That's a bit too much even for me. At that moment, a woman flew down from the air and then landed next to Camille. Quaya. A vibration that rang throughout the ground resonated. But Camille made an extremely welcoming expression, looked at the woman who landed, Sophia, and then asked, "It took you a while, did you find him?" Sophia shook her head at those words. "I searched all around here according to your wishes, but he's not here. He doesn't even get caught in my trait either." Camille clenched her teeth as she looked at Sophia. If Sophia can't find him, then I really can't find him. Trait library. It gave information about the things one didn't know, and also gave simple information as to what to do. A trait that really stood out in this world, where information became strength and power. Sophia also made a fed-up expression as she spoke. This is a first for me too. Usually there's only 2 different scenarios where they don't show up when I want to find them. Camille clenched her teeth at those words, since she knew about it somewhat. If Sophia thinks of something she wanted, then a location or a direction will show up. But there were only 2 cases where it won't come out. A location where it was too dangerous for Sophia, or non-existence. Did he really? But sadly, there wasn't any places in the red zone where Sophia's strength was not enough. Since Sophia was a strong person who was above the standards, which means the likelihood of the second case was high. While Camille was making a worried expression, Sophia's eyes suddenly brightened up. The location comes up. Why does it suddenly come out? Sophia made a confused expression. Since she was able to find Hansu's location that Camille had asked for suddenly. Anyways, she would be able to find him now. Let's go. Who you K? Camille was shocked at Sophia, who had aggressively hugged her, but she couldn't even retaliate. And soon Sophia, who was holding on to Camille, aggressively launched off from the ground. Quailing. Soon Sophia, who was holding on to Camille, disappeared to the distant base route while giving off a loud noise. It's completely dead. Hansu stopped on the way down and then approached the devouring and vomiting root that had completely stopped working. Since it could not maintain its huge body once the divine stone fragment was extracted. Hansu went inside the body and then cut up a certain section. This is it. An organ the size of Hansu's head that was located deep within the core of the main body. This was the core memory drive organ that had all the genetic information of the beasts within it. Hansu quickly moved towards Michael after taking the memory drive organ. It was much easier to receive the help of the clan in order to find out information about the changes around the world tree. Since the influence of Lighthouse, one of the 6 great pillars, had reached every corner. It was just that 150 of them had fallen here, but there was around 10,000 and around 40 sub-clans. They would be able to find it out immediately, no matter what the clan tried to do. Kuwung. Michael made a bitter expression as he looked at Hansu, who had fitted himself with a brand new armor. An armor that didn't seem simple at a single glance. Where does this guy keep picking up all these things? He started to understand why this guy had denied his offer around this point. The moment Hansu looked at that Michael and tried to explain his situation, a loud shockwave resonated from the world tree root above. Kagagugu. To the point where the noise made that far above resonated to them who were underground. The vibrations became bigger and bigger, then something penetrated the wall of the underground area and came down. Boom. Ku, what is this? While Michael was frowning, something walked out from the dust. Whoa, Michael, it's been a while. It has been 6 months since we last saw each other, right? At those words, Michael grinded his teeth. Sophia. Got him, Nit. Michael frowned. He had gained the intel before he had been swallowed up by the devil's mouth. That one of the 7 departed souls was roaming around this place. Why did it have to be that damned bitch? While Michael grinded his teeth, Sophia put down the dizzy Camille and then looked around at her surroundings. Is that guy Hansu? She knew instantly, since he was the only one here she had not seen before. The others were people she had collided with once or twice when she went up against Michael in the past. Sophia looked at Hansu and then opened her trait, the library. Let's see. Kang Hansu. Minus first year adventurer. Own skill 1. Average rune amount 39.4%. Though it didn't really show up in front of her like this, but it came down to this once she organized the things that came up in her head. It seemed almost like hacking, but his limits were clear as well. It wasn't that clear, but she could guess her opponent to a degree, using her experiences so far. And Sophia frowned because of this. He killed the calamity fish with this. And it seemed like he had killed the main body of the devil's mouth as well. No way. The fact that he was very lacking was enough. A first year who only had one skill with runes less than 50%. Though it was amazing for a first year, but that was just relative in the end. If he was compared to the rest of the red zone, then he couldn't even reach the middle. How did he kill it with that level? And if he did kill it, what level would he reach once he filled up all his runes? I need to see the level of the artifact. Right as Sophia was about to check Hansu with more detail, Hansu looked at Sophia and spoke out. Try focusing on something else other than me. What? At that moment, something came into Sophia's head. Sophia's expressions froze at the sudden strange feeling that had come into her head. This strong sensation that her trait was transmitting to her. Danger. And only really big danger at that. Something coming down from up. Sophia felt the slight vibrations along the world tree as she looked at the hole she had made on the way and high up in the world tree root. A humongous snake was coiled around the world tree. Ouroboros. The easiest calamity to confirm with the eyes, unlike the others. Actually, this guy didn't really directly hurt humans. There was only one thing it did. It drank the toxic waters supplied to the world tree after biting around the pillar in the middle with its head that was larger than a small island. Of course, the people below will starve since that thing would drain the toxic waters that was going to be turned into nutritional fluids by the world tree, but they stayed like that. Since they didn't want to even imagine the case where that thing would get pissed and come down. An existence that they were thankful for staying still. At the same time, that thing was one of the few methods for the people living at the roots to reach the branch safely. Since it was very hard even for adventurers of the red zone to climb up to the branch that reached over the clouds without getting tired. But they could reach their destinations with much more ease by stepping atop the body which coiled around the tree and had its tail around the ground. So a lot of people stepped on its body and headed towards the branch, but there was still a location they never got close to. Head. This thing will ruthlessly attack once they get near the head that was drinking the toxic waters. But there was a person who had reached the head. The clone, who had now found his name to be Tekkalan, entered through one of the countless gaps between the scales. The Ouroboros was also growing a huge number of parasites within its body for defensive purposes, but they moved aside after looking at Tekkalan. Kagagugu. Tekkalan, who had arrived inside the head, places his hand on the central nervous system as he quickly tapped into the Ouroboros using his power. Kuowu. Though the Ouroboros was slightly guarded against the strange creature that had invaded its head, but it didn't act rashly, since it was quite confused. The guy felt like his creator, but was different from the creator in some ways. That difference was making the Ouroboros hesitate. At that moment, a command flew into his head. This is for you. Close every hole in the body, including the mouth, so that nobody can come in. The Ouroboros screamed out in dissatisfaction at those commands. It was eating. For the thing to disturb him, eating when he didn't even seem like a complete creator. Then the creator-like creature who had seen the reaction of Ouroboros made a new command instead. Then just close all the pores in the body except the mouth. Kururuk. That wouldn't be a problem. The Ouroboros covered its whole body with its steel plate-like scales. Tekkalan clicked his tongue as he saw the reaction of Ouroboros. Damn it, I set the instinct of wanting food too strong on this guy. It'll take a while. Tekkalan slowly invaded it so he wouldn't irritate it. Since this thing could go crazy if he tried to get it under his command from the get-go. Quite a large amount of time was needed to him to fill up his greed for food. I don't have time. Tekkalan clenched his teeth. He didn't know how much time had passed between his last and current memory. He wanted to go down with Ouroboros and crush them when he thought of his race who would have died and will continue to die while he bought time. Anyways, he didn't need to care about the people who had landed here, unlike the Elvenheim who took a bit of effort. But Tekkelin was breathing in and out alone. 2 weeks. I can control it after 2 weeks. I will take this guy and go down in 2 weeks. He wouldn't be able to come in and set up a trap since all the pores were closed, and if he were to get frustrated and then attack then, Ouroboros will smash him apart. There's no need to hurry. He was used to waiting. Since there were memories he had suppressed during the time he was born as the Elvenheim, and until he finished all his preparations after becoming king. And because he had held on to it for a long time and prepared for it, he was able to attack the Elvenheims when they weren't suspecting, and could go against the army of the 5 great tiger generals who rushed in to stop the crazy king and the calamities. Tekkelin put his hands on the central nervous system of the Ouroboros, who was busy eating as he gave the strongest order he could give. Though it was hard to make it stop eating and go down, since it had a large liking for toxic waters, but everything else wasn't that hard. I guess I need to open it for a moment. Tekkelin gave his orders as soon as he finished his decision. It's really high. One of the Hecate clansmen spoke out after seeing the scene that could be seen below her feet as she was climbing up the pillar on Ouroboros. The toxic sea that was spread far and wide endlessly, and the wide world tree mountain range that was on top of it. Though it had dried up, the sheer size of it covered over it and showing quite a spectacle. The woman, Chwi, who had been climbing up with the man, Ben, who was applauding the scene, spoke as she laughed. Better artifacts come out if you go up a bit more from here. Be strong a bit longer. We need to gear ourselves anyway since we'll be going over to the next zone soon. Ben replied at these words. Like the 7 departed souls. Chwi slightly frowned as she nodded. 7 departed souls. People who had filled up the requirements to go up, and had grown strong to the point where they would threaten all of the 6 great pillars by themselves, and had not gone up for some reason. If you average out of the years, the 7 departed souls stayed within the red zone, then it was 11. People who had gotten stronger and stronger by staying in the red zone for almost around 11 years. Actually, there were some first years. People who had come to this world with heirs or Chaldean, who had left behind a legend, which meant that they had stayed in the red zone for 20 years alone. And because of this, they were called departed souls. They would usually call those people seniles, but they were too afraid to. They aren't right in their heads. Chwi blessed her thoughts as she spoke while smiling. Yeah, where do you think the 7 departed souls have gotten those rare artifacts from? Kuhuhu, they say we might be able to obtain the feather if we're lucky. Wow, then there are more reasons to go up then. He didn't even want the top-class artifacts that the 7 departed souls had. They would be able to equip themselves with gear a full tier up once they gained a single feather. Ben started to quickly walk upwards as if those words energized him. At that moment, a strange sound was heard from somewhere. Kejujujuduk. Ben, who was quite sensitive enough to the point of working as a member of the search team of the Hecate clan, quickly looked around. The surface of the Ouroboros, which was covered with scales that were few meters long, was shaking up and down. Then something started to crawl out from between the scales. Ben was shocked once he saw this. Uag parasites. The things the people, who entered Ouroboros without knowing the dangers through the scales, met first. Damn it, run! Ben and Chwi looked at the giant parasites that reached over 4 m in height as they started to madly run atop of Ouroboros. Billions of grasshopper-shaped parasites crawled out as they started to attack. Chapter 80, Racial War 3. Kurururu. Michael clenched his teeth as he received the messages and carrier pigeons that were flowing in madly from all around. Is there a possibility that you killing that has some relationship with the reason why the parasites of Ouroboros have gone crazy? There was chaos going on the routes above, since they said that a huge amount of parasites that could be clearly seen from below were crawling out of the body of Ouroboros and marching down. Billions of them when they weren't even weak. And there was only one reason why the Ouroboros who had been quiet for 20 years was like that. Hansu nodded at those words. I wondered where he went. It seems like he went to connect to Ouroboros. Actually, the situation which worried him wasn't the parasites, but rather him just bringing down the snake. Since then it will become so dangerous to the point where it wouldn't even be comparable to the parasites. But since he isn't doing so, it seems that it'll take some time. Anyways, I don't think I can do anything inside of it then. According to his original plan, he was going to feed poison to the Ouroboros and slowly grind it up from the inside. But there was no way the clone will sit and watch him rampaging inside it, which meant that it was a full frontal battle. Time is important then. The longer it took for him to come down, the better. There was no way for him to know when he will come down usually, but there was an amazing alternative method in front of him. There weren't many people with the trait library who hadn't gotten strong. Intelligence and information were the strongest weapon of all, since there was a huge difference between knowing and not knowing the direction even for simple things. And the woman in front of him actually proved this. It's been a while, Sofia Varjura. Hansu laughed quietly in his mind. Sofia Varjura, one of the final 100 of the human race, who had been running towards the crystal in the distant past. Of course she was quite close with him too. Well, we can talk things out later. He needed intel at this moment. Hansu spoke towards Sofia. How long do you think it'll take until that thing comes down? What? Michael freaked out at those words. There was no way that he asked about the parasites coming down, since they could check with their own eyes, which meant that something else was coming down, and there was only one other existence that could trouble this guy. For the Ouroboros to come down when the parasites were dangerous enough. Sofia squinted her eyes as she looked at Hansu. How did he know that I would know? Exactly a few days. It wasn't something like this. But the danger she felt on the skin was increasing, and if she calculated with this new sensation, then something big will happen in 14 days or 16 days at the latest. Since there was no way that the parasites will take 14 days to come down, so there's only one other way. The abnormal Ouroboros will be coming down. Oh God, something big has happened. Sofia clenched her teeth. For something like this to happen, when keeping the seal alone was busy enough. Hansu looked towards Sofia and then asked again. How long does it take? I need to know that in order to set up a plan properly. The one who was actually in chaos from Hansu's attitude was Camille, since Sofia was also known for being extremely bad-tempered. 2 weeks. But Sofia replied obediently, unlike Camille's expectations. She was too busy calculating what will happen once that thing came down. First contact the leader, then. Her mind was too occupied for her to have the will to squabble with him. But the problem rose from a different location. The Ouroboros is coming down in only 2 weeks. Michael clenched his teeth. He then made his decision instantly. Escape. Michael then opened his mouth. We'll leave then, since there won't be much time. Camille, who had been listening, shouted out in confusion. What are you saying? We'll all die if we don't fight. If something like that came down, then there won't be a hole to escape. What was he thinking? Michael gazed at Camille and then spoke out. If there wasn't an escape route, then probably, but that's not the case. Sofia also frowned at Michael's words. This was why she hated the clansmen, since they grouped up by themselves and backed off during important moments. You crazy bastards, are you all going to go over? Camille frowned at those words, since she finally understood what Michael's words of not needing to fight meant. She had forgotten from shock that there wasn't only the red zone in the other world. Damn it, the passage opened soon. Camille looked towards the trunk of the world tree. The Hecarim clan, one of the 6 pillars like the lighthouse. Jukma, the clan lord, looked at one of the giant trunks behind his main camp. The 6 pillars weren't something metaphorical. The giant trunk of the world tree split up into 6 thick paths when it got close to the surface. The 6 split-up world tree stems dropped down horizontally until the land, split up into 12 roots, and then continued to spread along the surface. And this was why they were 6 pillars and 12 base roots. Because of this, the 6 pillars was the best place to give out nutritional fluids to everyone within the clan, since it was the start of where the world tree spread the nutritional fluid from. And only the strongest 6 clans could stay here because of this. Well, I don't know why they don't place it in a more comfortable location. But the food line not being severed was one of the most important factors. Jukma gazed contently at the giant trunk which fed the entire clan, and then looked over at the lake in the distance behind the trunk. Lake. A huge lake that was between the 6 huge trunks. It wasn't made of toxic waters either. But then it also wasn't made of nutritional fluids. The people called this lake the Mirror. A man walked towards Jukma, who was staring at the lake. What shall we do? Amelstaden, who acted as the spear of the Hecarim clan, calmly asked as he heard the madly rushing news from the outside. It had been 3 years since they had been here. But there was not a single time where something like this had happened. Billions of parasites, huh? It wasn't a number that made him think of a loss. The number was definitely threatening, but the path they could take to come down was limited to the body of our robber rose, and the strength of the 6 pillars, 12 roots and other clans was formidable as well. Which meant that if the 6 pillars, 12 roots and higher clans were gathered, then it would be possible to withstand it despite receiving large amounts of damage. If we group up, that is. Jukma opened his mouth after finishing his thoughts. We've enjoyed as much as we needed, right? Amelstaden pondered for a moment and then nodded. 1 year where he had crazily struggled to survive after coming to this world. 1 year where he had madly ran to get stronger so he can go up. 6 months of finally finding some leisure and enjoying this, and that while watching others struggle. Though he had only rested for 6 months out of 3 years, he had no problem with this. Resting for 6 months was a long time. Jukma laughed as he spoke. They all prepared quite a few artifacts, right? In orange. Correct. Their runes were currently red. The runes that came out from the world tree, mountain ranges, were only red. But sometimes an orange artifact that they couldn't even use dropped around the branches. The fairies are quite kind. Though they can't use it here, it will become much easier for them if they got a good artifact here for the next zone. Since a good weapon was the core of a strong battle power. Jukma listened to Amelstaden's report of being ready, and then laughed coldly as he spoke. Then let's go over slowly. He had fun as much as he should have. He was pondering whether to go up, but for a big event like this to happen. Such an event was basically giving him the final push. Then Jukma looked over to the lake, Mirror. They couldn't eat or drink it. There was only one use for the lake. A passage to get to the next zone. Get ready, the remaining ones, well, they'll do well on their own. Yes. In order to get out before this place got run over by the parasites, they needed to hurry a little bit. Jukma remembered something while making the plan and then spoke. Oh yeah, I heard there was quite a special guy out of the newcomers this time around. At those words, Jukma nodded to himself. That is right. There's quite a lot of fun guys out of the Koreans this time. Let's take him. We can just give him runes and raise him. Understood. Amelstaden heard Jukma's words, and then started to send carrier pigeons and messages in all directions. Michael opened his mouth as he looked towards the 6 trunks. In 2 days the passage is going to open. Once the mirror opens, then there's no need for others of the pillars to fight. They will probably leave first. Sorry, but that's the case for us as well. Going through the mirror was very simple. Once a month, the surface of the lake turned like a mirror. They just needed to go through it then. If they have the qualifications, then they will disappear into it. If they don't, then they will walk out from the spot whence they walked in from. Of course, most of their clansmen, who were high-level adventurers, had the qualifications. They had been pushing it back until it now, but then there's no reason to not leave anymore. There's no reason to get massacred in a fight where there's nothing to gain. Sophia grinded her teeth at Michael's words. These bitches, seriously, you guys are really heartless. Those who don't have the qualifications cannot leave. Of course, all the other high-ranking adventurers, including themselves, will leave. But then what will happen to the countless other adventurers left behind? If strong people flood it out, then the ones remaining below will just get massacred. Michael snorted at Sophia's words. What, then you want us to get killed here as well? I don't know about the parasites, but what are you going to do when the Ouroboros comes down? You damned bitch. I don't know what you're thinking, but to us our clan is more important than everyone else in the world combined. Fighting with their life on the line for people they don't know about. Words were easy to speak. But could they actually do it? It was human nature to feel sad for their own family, getting hurt more than a distant war. I can't give up. As Michael and Sophia's argument grew, the one who was feeling troubled was actually Camille. Camille looked towards Hansu after staring at the two for a while. He had killed 2 of the 4 calamities so far. Wouldn't he have a method of dealing with the Ouroboros as well? Do you perhaps have a method of killing the Ouroboros? Michael snorted at Camille's words. Hansu had killed the calamities by wrecking them from inside the body. But for some reason, the Ouroboros sent out all the parasites which acted as the inner defensive system. What did this mean? This means that it won't let anyone come inside anymore. According to his clansmen inspections, every hole in its body was being blocked by the scales on the body. This meant that they have to kill it in a full frontal battle, but a single swipe from that snake tail could smash apart the giant root they were standing on. Though it did not have any special abilities like the devouring and vomiting root, but the size, hardness, and mass of its body made it overwhelming. Killing that thing in a head-on battle did not make any sense. No, if nobody distracted the parasites to buy time, then fighting it was impossible in the first place. Hansu nodded at those words. It's a bit hard alone. Everyone made a surprised expression. That meant that he could kill it if they helped. Hansu started to quickly calculate things within his head. 2 weeks are a bit tight. A beast that was getting controlled by somebody who had evil intentions, and a beast that was faithful to its primitive instinct. There was no need to say which was more dangerous. It wasn't that they were going to wait 2 weeks and killing it after it comes down. They had to beat it before 2 weeks, before that thing was completely under control. It's too hard to do it alone. If he and the 7 departed souls combine their power and borrow the power of the artifact, it'd be doable to fight with the bastard drinking zealously the poison water. Not only Sophia, we call the 6 others as well, and while the 6 pillars and the other guys block the parasites, we climb to beat the Ouroboros. Other people wouldn't know, but there was a way of contact between the 7 departed souls. Done thinking, Hansu opened his mouth and explained his plan. And Michael, Sophia, and everybody else froze after hearing the plan. You want us to trust that kind of plan and not leave. If they miss the chance of 2 days later, they're trapped here for a whole month. If Hansu fails to kill the Ouroboros, after 2 weeks of calm, they'll have no choice but to spend the remaining 2 weeks until the passage opens again with the Ouroboros raging around. PR edited this sentence heavily to make it clear. There was not much to say about the result as well. No, even then, why would the other clans agree and help them? Damn it, what is he thinking? Is he mad? Michael clenched his teeth inwardly. But Sophia's expression froze because of another reason. Do you guys even know what we are doing? The people thought that those who were called the 7 departed souls were running around the branches for stronger or better artifacts. And they thought that this was the reason why they weren't seen from the eyes of those around the trunk or roots. But this was not correct. The reason why they were staying around in this place for such a long time was not because of such petty reasons. And because of this, the 7 of them could not leave at the same time. Hansu quietly grasped onto Sophia's hands from those words. What? While Sophia was surprised, Hansu wrote something down on Sophia's hand. Akuma, what are you? The thing that they were sealing. Sophia's expression froze from the word that no one should know other than the 7 of them, the word which Hansu had written down on her hand.